People remember how you made them feel longer than what you said. People remember how you made them feel longer than what you said, because emotion is the language the brain stores most efficiently. Words are processed, analyzed, and often forgotten, but feelings are absorbed directly into memory. When someone walks away from an interaction, their mind may lose the details of the conversation, but their body remembers the emotional residue you left behind. This happens because the human brain prioritizes emotional experiences as survival data. Emotion tells the nervous system what is safe, what is dangerous, what is comforting, and what is threatening. When you make someone feel valued, seen, embarrassed, dismissed, or inspired, that sensation attaches itself to your presence. Long after the facts blur, the feeling resurfaces the moment they think of you. This is why a single careless comment can outweigh 100 kind ones, and why a brief moment of empathy can build lifelong loyalty. People don't replay conversations word for word, but they replay how small they felt, how understood they felt, or how alive they felt in your presence. Emotion becomes the shortcut their brain uses to decide whether to trust you, avoid you, or seek you out again. It's also why charm works even when logic doesn't, and why someone can say all the right things yet still feel wrong. Tone, timing, presence, and intention shape emotional memory far more than vocabulary ever could. Every interaction quietly answers a deeper question the brain is always asking. How did this person make me feel about myself? That answer becomes the memory. Confidence often matters more than competence. Confidence often matters more than competence because the human brain uses certainty as a shortcut for truth. When someone speaks, moves, or decides with conviction, it signals safety, leadership, and control, qualities the mind instinctively trusts. Competence requires evaluation, but confidence requires only perception, and perception is faster, louder, and more persuasive. This is rooted in survival psychology. In uncertain environments, early humans followed those who appeared sure of themselves, not necessarily those who were most skilled. Hesitation suggested danger. Certainty suggested direction. That wiring never disappeared. Today, the brain still associates confidence with capability, even when evidence is thin. A confident tone can override doubt, while a hesitant expert can be dismissed without a second thought. Confidence also shapes how information is received. When delivered assertively, ideas feel more credible, decisions feel more justified, and risks feel smaller. The same message spoken with uncertainty triggers skepticism. This is why people often trust confident speakers, leaders, and performers before verifying their actual ability. Confidence frames reality before logic has a chance to intervene. This dynamic explains why underqualified individuals rise quickly while highly skilled people remain unseen. Competence stays invisible if it isn't presented with certainty. The world doesn't reward what you know. It rewards what others believe you know. Confidence becomes the amplifier that determines whether competence is noticed or ignored. There is also an emotional component. Confidence makes others feel secure. It reduces anxiety, creates momentum, and offers relief from indecision. People are drawn to those who seem unbothered by doubt, even if that calm is manufactured. The mind prefers a confident illusion over an uncertain truth, because certainty feels safer than accuracy. Most people aren't busy. They're avoiding something. Most people aren't busy. They're avoiding something because avoidance feels safer than confrontation. Busyness is one of the most socially acceptable disguises for fear. It sounds productive, responsible, and important, but underneath it often hides discomfort the mind doesn't want to face. When something threatens identity, security, or self-worth, the brain looks for exits, and being busy becomes the perfect one. Avoidance is a protective response. The brain is designed to minimize emotional pain, not maximize growth. Difficult conversations, uncertain decisions, unmet goals, and uncomfortable truths activate stress responses. Instead of engaging, the mind redirects attention toward tasks that feel urgent but are emotionally neutral. Emails, errands, scrolling, and endless planning create the illusion of progress while keeping the real issue untouched. This is why people delay change while convincing themselves they're preparing. Action would force clarity, and clarity would force accountability. Staying busy preserves ambiguity. It allows people to say, "not now," without ever saying, "I'm afraid." The nervous system learns that distraction brings relief, so it reinforces the pattern again and again. Busyness also protects self-image. If someone is always occupied, failure can be blamed on lack of time rather than lack of courage. It becomes a shield against disappointment and judgment. The tragedy is that avoidance compounds anxiety. What is avoided grows heavier, louder, and more emotionally charged over time. Deep down, people know what they're avoiding. That quiet tension beneath constant motion is the body signaling unfinished business. Busyness isn't the absence of time. It's the presence of something the mind doesn't want to feel. The brain prefers familiar pain over unfamiliar peace. The brain prefers familiar pain over unfamiliar peace because predictability feels safer than uncertainty, even when predictability hurts. Pain that is known can be anticipated, managed, and mentally rehearsed. Peace that is unfamiliar requires adaptation, and adaptation demands vulnerability. The nervous system doesn't ask whether something is good for you. It asks whether it is known. From a survival perspective, familiarity equals safety. The brain learns patterns and builds expectations around them, even when those patterns involve stress, neglect, or disappointment. If pain has been consistent, it becomes part of the internal map. Letting it go means stepping into territory where outcomes are unclear, and the brain interprets that as risk. This is why people stay in draining relationships, repeat self-sabotaging habits, or return to environments that diminish them. The discomfort is painful, but it is predictable. Unfamiliar peace would require trusting that nothing bad is about to happen, and for a brain shaped by struggle, calm can feel like a warning sign rather than a reward. The nervous system becomes calibrated to chaos. When peace arrives, it feels empty, boring, or suspicious. The absence of tension is misread as the absence of meaning. This creates an unconscious pull back toward what hurts, not because it feels good, but because it feels recognizable. Breaking this pattern is destabilizing at first. Healing often feels worse before it feels better because the brain must learn new emotional rules. Familiar pain keeps you stuck, but unfamiliar peace feels unsafe until your nervous system learns that safety doesn't have to hurt. We judge others by actions and ourselves by intentions. We judge others by actions and ourselves by intentions because the mind is biased towards self-protection. When observing others, we only see outcomes, what they did, what they said, and the impact it had. But when judging ourselves, we look inward, where intentions feel pure, complex, and emotionally justified. This imbalance allows us to preserve a positive self-image while holding others to a harsher standard. The brain is wired to interpret its own behavior through context. We remember our stress, our fear, our reasons. Mistakes feel understandable when viewed from the inside, but other people's inner worlds are invisible, so their actions become the full story. The mind fills in the gaps with assumptions, often negative, because certainty feels safer than ambiguity. This is why people excuse their own missteps as situational while labeling others as careless, rude, or selfish. Intention softens self-judgment, while action hardens judgment of others. It creates a silent moral imbalance where we see ourselves as misunderstood and others as accountable. Emotion intensifies this bias. When we feel guilt or regret, our intentions become a shield against shame. Acknowledging impact would threaten identity, so the mind redirects focus to what was meant, not what occurred. This preserves self-worth but damages empathy. Over time, this pattern fractures connection. People feel judged for what they do while feeling unseen for why they did it. Relationships strain when everyone feels justified and no one feels understood. The mind isn't seeking fairness, it's seeking emotional survival, even if that survival comes at the cost of understanding others as generously as we understand ourselves. Silence makes insecure people uncomfortable. Silence makes insecure people uncomfortable because it removes the noise they use to regulate their sense of worth. When words stop, there is nothing to hide behind, no validation to grab, no reactions to control, no reassurance to collect. Silence forces the mind inward, and for an insecure person, what waits inside feels threatening. The brain of someone who lacks inner stability relies heavily on external feedback. Conversation becomes a way to measure safety, approval, and status in real time. Silence interrupts that feedback loop. Without immediate signals, the mind begins to fill the gap with assumptions, usually negative ones. Am I being judged? Did I say something wrong? Do they dislike me? The uncertainty becomes unbearable. Silence also shifts power. The person who is comfortable with quiet controls the emotional pace of the interaction. For someone insecure, this loss of control feels destabilizing. Talking becomes a way to regain footing, to steer perception, to reassure themselves that they still matter in the moment. Words are used not to communicate, but to soothe internal anxiety. This is why insecure people often over-explain, interrupt, or rush to fill pauses. The silence feels loud because it amplifies self-doubt. It becomes a mirror reflecting thoughts they've been trying to outrun. Calm quiet exposes emotional dependency on validation. Those who are secure experience silence differently. They don't interpret it as rejection or threat. For the insecure, however, silence feels like abandonment in slow motion. The discomfort isn't caused by the absence of sound, but by the absence of reassurance they haven't learned to give themselves. People project their insecurities onto others. People project their insecurities onto others because facing them internally feels too threatening. The mind protects the ego by relocating discomfort outward, turning inner conflict into external judgment. What feels unbearable to acknowledge within is easier to criticize, mock, or attack when it appears in someone else. Projection is a psychological defense, not a conscious choice. When someone feels inadequate, rejected, or afraid, admitting that vulnerability would challenge their self-image. Instead, the brain shifts the emotion away from the self. The insecurity doesn't disappear. It changes location. It becomes an opinion, a complaint, or an accusation directed at someone else. This is why people often criticize traits they secretly fear in themselves. Arrogance, laziness, weakness, neediness, or incompetence are called out most aggressively by those who feel closest to those labels internally. The emotional charge behind the judgment reveals its source. The stronger the reaction, the deeper the insecurity it's protecting. Projection also preserves control. By focusing on another person's flaws, attention is diverted from one's own unresolved pain. It creates a temporary sense of superiority and relief, even though the underlying issue remains untouched. The brain chooses this relief because self-examination feels more dangerous than blame. This mechanism shapes relationships quietly and destructively. Innocent behavior becomes interpreted as a threat, intention is replaced with assumption, and conflict grows from misdirected emotion. Recognizing projection is unsettling because it forces accountability. but awareness dissolves its power. What someone projects onto you often says nothing about you and everything about what they're running from inside themselves. Being liked is often mistaken for being respected. Being liked is often mistaken for being respected because approval feels warm while respect feels distant, and the brain confuses comfort with value. When people smile, agree, and offer praise, it creates an immediate sense of safety. Respect, however, is quieter. It doesn't always feel good in the moment, and it doesn't always come with reassurance. Liking is rooted in emotional ease. It comes from being agreeable, accommodating, and non-threatening. Respect is rooted in boundaries, consistency, and perceived strength. The problem is that the human mind craves acceptance more than authority, so it often sacrifices respect to maintain harmony. This trade feels harmless at first, but it slowly erodes how others perceive you. People may enjoy your presence while simultaneously disregarding your limits. They may laugh with you, but not listen to you. Approval can coexist with dismissal. Respect, on the other hand, changes behavior. It influences how seriously your words are taken, how your time is valued, and how your boundaries are treated when you're not in the room. This confusion is reinforced by social conditioning. Many are taught that being liked is the goal, especially when conflict feels risky. But respect is not built through pleasing others. It's built through clarity, self-trust, and the willingness to disappoint. That discomfort signals strength, and strength alters hierarchy. Being liked makes people feel good about you. Being respected makes people think twice before crossing you. When the two are confused, people chase validation while wondering why they're overlooked. The shift happens when approval is no longer the priority and self-respect becomes non-negotiable. Your brain believes what you repeatedly tell it. Your brain believes what you repeatedly tell it because repetition is how the mind decides what is real. The brain doesn't verify thoughts for truth, it verifies them for familiarity. When an idea is repeated, silently or out loud, it becomes easier to access, and what is easier to access feels more true. Over time, repetition transforms thoughts into beliefs, and beliefs quietly shape identity. This is how self-talk becomes self-concept. A thought repeated during moments of emotion carries even more weight because emotion signals importance. When you repeatedly tell yourself you are incapable, unwanted, behind, or unworthy, the brain stops questioning it and starts organizing behavior around it. It looks for evidence to confirm the narrative, filtering reality to match the story it has learned. The brain is designed to conserve energy. Once a belief is familiar, challenging it feels inefficient and uncomfortable. New information that contradicts it is resisted, while information that supports it is welcomed. This creates a feedback loop where repeated thoughts harden into mental defaults, influencing decisions, reactions, and expectations without conscious awareness. This mechanism works the same way for empowering narratives. Repeated messages of capability, safety, and growth slowly recalibrate the nervous system. At first, they feel false because they are unfamiliar, but familiarity, not accuracy, is what the brain responds to first. Over time, the brain aligns behavior with whatever story it hears most often. It doesn't ask who taught it or whether the story is fair. It simply adapts. What you repeat becomes what you expect, and what you expect becomes what you notice, shaping your reality from the inside out. People fear rejection more than failure. People fear rejection more than failure because rejection threatens belonging, and belonging is tied directly to survival. Failure is an event. Rejection feels like a judgment of identity. When people fail, they can blame circumstances, timing, or lack of skill. When they are rejected, the mind interprets it as something being wrong with who they are. The brain is wired to prioritize social acceptance. For most of human history, being excluded from the group meant danger, isolation, or death. That ancient wiring still operates beneath modern logic. Even today, rejection activates the same neural pathways as physical pain. The nervous system reacts as if something vital has been taken away. Failure can be private. Rejection is relational. It involves being seen, evaluated, and dismissed. This is why people avoid asking, confessing, applying, or expressing interest. The risk isn't losing the opportunity. It's losing dignity, connection, and emotional safety in someone else's eyes. This fear quietly shapes behavior. People choose safe goals over meaningful ones. They hide ambition, affection, and opinions to avoid standing out. They'd rather fail at something small than be rejected for something that truly matters. The pain of failure fades with time. The memory of rejection lingers because it attacks self-worth. Rejection doesn't just say no, it feels like being pushed outside the circle. The brain doesn't ask whether the rejection is reasonable or temporary. It reacts instantly, emotionally, and defensively. That is why people hesitate longer at the edge of vulnerability than at the edge of effort. Compliments reveal what people value most. Compliments reveal what people value most because praise is rarely random. When someone notices and highlights a trait in another person, they are unconsciously revealing what their own mind prioritizes, admires, or longs for. The words may be directed outward, but the meaning points inward. The brain is selective with attention. Out of countless traits someone could acknowledge, the ones that stand out are filtered through personal values, unmet needs, and identity. A person who praises intelligence often values being seen as intelligent. Someone who compliments kindness may crave emotional safety. Those who admire confidence are usually drawn to the security it represents, especially if they struggle to feel it themselves. Compliments are also projections of aspiration. People praise what they respect, envy, or wish they embodied more fully. This is why compliments often carry emotional weight beyond politeness. They are small confessions disguised as generosity. In expressing admiration, people momentarily reveal the internal hierarchy their mind operates by. This dynamic explains why certain compliments feel deeply validating while others feel hollow. The most impactful praise aligns with something the speaker truly values, not something socially expected. Authentic admiration resonates because it comes from a genuine internal reference point. Compliments also function as social signals. They communicate alignment, desire for connection, and shared values. The brain uses them to build rapport while subtly revealing its priorities. If you listen closely, compliments become psychological fingerprints. They show you what someone respects, what they seek, and often what they feel is missing within themselves. Overexplaining signals insecurity. Overexplaining signals insecurity because it reveals a fear of being misunderstood, judged, or rejected. When someone feels internally certain, they state what needs to be said and allow it to stand. When doubt creeps in, the mind scrambles to add context, justification, and reassurance, hoping that more words will create acceptance or prevent conflict. This behavior is driven by anxiety, not intention. The brain interprets uncertainty from others as danger, so it attempts to regain control by filling every possible gap. Over-explaining becomes a way to manage imagined objections before they are even voiced. Each extra sentence is an attempt to reduce risk, but it often does the opposite. Listeners don't hear clarity, they hear hesitation. Excessive explanation subtly communicates that you don't fully trust your own position. Instead of reinforcing your point, it weakens it by signaling that your statement needs defense. Confidence speaks once, insecurity keeps talking. Over-explaining is also rooted in people-pleasing. It tries to soften boundaries, justify needs, and earn permission for choices that don't require approval. This trains others to expect access to your reasoning, as if your decisions must be validated to be legitimate. Emotionally, it comes from a learned belief that being misunderstood is dangerous. Many people over-explain because past experiences taught them that silence led to punishment or conflict. The nervous system learned that more words meant more safety. The irony is that restraint creates authority. When you stop explaining yourself to those who aren't entitled to explanations, your words gain weight. Silence leaves space for confidence to be felt rather than proven. Loneliness can exist even in crowded rooms. Loneliness can exist even in crowded rooms because it is not caused by the absence of people, but by the absence of connection. The brain does not measure belonging by proximity. It measures it by emotional safety, recognition, and being seen. You can be surrounded by voices, laughter, and movement, yet feel completely invisible if none of it reaches you. This form of loneliness is often more painful because it contradicts what you're supposed to feel. The mind expects that being around others should provide relief, so when it doesn't, the isolation feels personal. The nervous system interprets this disconnect as rejection, even when no one is intentionally excluding you. It becomes a quiet realization that you are present, but not known. Crowds amplify this sensation because they highlight contrast. Watching others connect while feeling detached intensifies the awareness of separation. The brain begins scanning for signs of belonging and finds none, reinforcing the feeling that something is missing. This activates the same emotional circuits as abandonment, even though no one has physically left. Loneliness in crowds often stems from emotional masking. When you hide parts of yourself to fit in, the connection you receive is shallow by default. The brain knows the difference. It registers interaction without intimacy, attention without understanding. This is why someone can feel more alone at a party than by themselves. Solitude can be peaceful, but emotional invisibility triggers pain. The mind isn't asking for more people. It's asking for resonance, someone who truly notices you. The mind fills gaps with assumptions, usually negative. Because uncertainty creates psychological tension the brain rushes to resolve. When information is missing, the brain doesn't wait patiently for clarity. It guesses. And those guesses are shaped not by logic, but by fear, past experiences, and emotional memory. The unknown feels unsafe, so the mind tries to protect itself by preparing for the worst. This tendency comes from survival wiring. In threatening environments, assuming danger was safer than assuming safety. If something was unclear, expecting harm increased the chances of survival. That instinct still operates today, even in situations where the threat is emotional rather than physical. Silence, delayed responses, ambiguous behavior, or unclear intentions trigger the same alarm system. When someone doesn't reply, the mind doesn't stay neutral. It creates stories. You're being ignored. You're not important. You did something wrong. These narratives feel real because the brain experiences imagined rejection almost as strongly as actual rejection. The body reacts before evidence arrives. Negative assumptions also protect ego. Blaming oneself or others feels more controllable than sitting with uncertainty. The mind would rather believe a painful story than tolerate not knowing. Over time, these assumptions harden into beliefs, shaping how people interpret future events. The danger is that assumed meaning becomes emotional reality. People react to conclusions that were never confirmed. Relationships fracture over imagined motives. Anxiety grows from stories the mind wrote to fill silence. The gap wasn't filled with truth, but with fear disguised as certainty. People want to be understood more than helped. People want to be understood more than helped because understanding soothes the nervous system, while help can feel like judgment. When someone is struggling, their deepest fear is not the problem itself, but the possibility of being minimized, or reduced to a fixable issue. Being understood tells the brain, "You are safe as you are," and that message lands before any solution ever could. The moment help is offered too quickly, it can signal that the listener is uncomfortable with the emotion being expressed. Advice, even when well-intentioned, can feel like a subtle rejection of someone's experience. It implies that the feeling needs to be changed rather than acknowledged. The brain interprets this as distance, not care. Understanding works differently. When someone feels truly heard, their emotional load decreases. The nervous system shifts out of defense because it no longer needs to prove the pain is real. Validation doesn't solve the problem, but it creates the internal stability required to face it. This is why people often feel relief simply by talking, even when nothing external changes. Being understood also preserves dignity. It allows someone to remain the expert of their own experience. Help can unintentionally position the listener as superior, while understanding creates equality. The brain relaxes in spaces where it doesn't feel evaluated. This is why people return to those who listen without fixing. Solutions can wait. Regulation cannot. Before the mind is ready to change, it needs to feel seen. Understanding is not passive. It is the foundation that makes real help possible later. We crave closure even when it hurts. We crave closure even when it hurts because the brain is deeply unsettled by uncertainty. An unanswered question creates mental noise that the mind keeps returning to, searching for resolution. Pain with an explanation feels more tolerable than ambiguity without one, because certainty allows the nervous system to stand down. From a psychological standpoint, the brain is a meaning-making machine. When something ends without explanation, it threatens our sense of order and control. Closure provides a narrative, and narratives calm the mind. Even if the truth is painful, it gives shape to the experience and allows the brain to file it away instead of endlessly reopening it. This is why people revisit old conversations, reread messages, or seek answers from those who have already shown they cannot give them. The emotional wound feels unfinished. The mind believes that one final detail will bring peace, even when history shows it won't. Hurt becomes preferable to not knowing. Closure is also tied to self-worth. Without answers, the brain often turns inward and fills the gaps with self-blame. A painful truth from another person can feel like relief compared to the endless self-interrogation of uncertainty. Knowing why something ended, even harshly, feels like regaining control. The danger is that closure is often an illusion. Not all endings offer explanations, and some answers create new questions. The craving itself can keep people emotionally attached long after the relationship or situation has ended. The mind wants finality, but healing doesn't always come from answers. Sometimes it comes from accepting that uncertainty is the only truth available. Familiarity can disguise toxicity. Familiarity can disguise toxicity because the brain confuses consistency with safety. When something is repeated long enough, it stops triggering alarm systems, even if it's harmful. The nervous system learns what to expect and adjusts to it, lowering resistance not because the situation is healthy, but because it is predictable. This is how damaging dynamics become normalized. Subtle disrespect, emotional neglect, manipulation, or chronic stress fade into the background when they are constant. The brain stops asking whether something feels good and starts asking whether it feels known. Over time, discomfort becomes baseline, and anything different feels wrong, even if it's healthier. Familiar toxicity often feels like comfort because it aligns with learned emotional patterns. If chaos, criticism, or inconsistency were present early in life, the nervous system may associate them with connection. Peace can feel empty, and stability can feel suspicious. The brain seeks what it recognizes, not what it needs. This is why people defend harmful environments and relationships. Leaving would mean confronting uncertainty, and uncertainty feels more threatening than ongoing harm. The mind minimizes damage to preserve emotional equilibrium, reframing pain as normal or not that bad. The most dangerous part of familiarity is how invisible it becomes. When toxicity is constant, you stop noticing it, you adapt around it. Only distance or contrast reveals how much it was costing you. The brain didn't fail you. It did what it was designed to do. It kept you oriented in what it knew, even when what it knew was hurting you. Emotions drive decisions. Logic justifies them. Emotions drive decisions. Logic justifies them because the brain is designed to feel first and explain later. Decision-making begins in the emotional centers of the brain, where value, fear, desire, and attachment are processed. Logic doesn't lead the process, it follows behind, constructing reasons that make the choice feel intelligent and acceptable. When a decision is made, it often happens in a split second, guided by emotion, intuition, or impulse. Only afterward does the rational mind step in to narrate the story. This narration gives the illusion of careful thought, even when the outcome was emotionally driven from the start. The brain prefers coherence over accuracy, so it builds explanations that protect self-image. This is why people defend choices that clearly contradict evidence. Admitting an emotional motive feels vulnerable. Logic offers dignity. It turns "this felt right" into "this made sense." The justification reduces internal conflict and prevents discomfort from facing bias or fear. Emotions also prioritize information. What feels urgent, exciting, or threatening gets immediate attention. Logic works slower, weighing consequences and probabilities, but by the time it engages, the direction is often already set. Reason becomes a tool for reinforcement rather than guidance. This pattern shows up everywhere, from relationships to careers to beliefs. People don't choose what is objectively best. They choose what feels safest, most rewarding, or least painful in the moment. Logic then arrives to clean up the emotional trail, making the decision sound deliberate, thoughtful, and inevitable. People notice confidence faster than kindness. People notice confidence faster than kindness because confidence announces itself, while kindness waits to be felt. The human brain is wired to scan environments quickly for signals of certainty, status, and control. Confidence registers immediately as a visible cue, while kindness requires time, attention, and emotional openness to recognize. Confidence is loud in subtle ways. It shows in posture, eye contact, tone of voice, and decisiveness. These signals are processed almost instantly by the brain as indicators of leadership and safety. Kindness, on the other hand, is often quiet. It reveals itself through consistency, patience, and empathy, qualities that don't demand attention but earn it over time. This is why confident people are often remembered first, even if they aren't the most compassionate. The brain prioritizes what feels strong and certain before it evaluates what feels gentle. In unfamiliar situations, people gravitate toward those who appear sure of themselves because certainty reduces anxiety. Kindness soothes later. Confidence reassures immediately. There is also a social conditioning element. Confidence is culturally rewarded and associated with success, while kindness is often seen as a moral bonus rather than a defining trait. As a result, confidence shapes first impressions, while kindness shapes long-term trust. This imbalance can be misleading. Confidence can exist without care, and kindness can exist without recognition. But over time, the nervous system recalibrates. Confidence may open the door, but kindness determines whether people feel safe enough to stay. What is noticed first is not always what matters most, only what the brain is trained to detect fastest. Most arguments are about unmet emotional needs. Most arguments are about unmet emotional needs because surface-level conflict is rarely the real issue. Words are just the delivery system. Beneath them sit feelings of being ignored, disrespected, unappreciated, or unsafe. The brain uses arguments as a way to demand what it feels it's not receiving. When an emotional need goes unmet, the nervous system shifts into defense. Logic narrows, tone sharpens, and the mind looks for evidence to justify its distress. What sounds like anger is often frustration. What sounds like criticism is often a plea to be seen. The argument becomes a proxy battle for validation. This is why facts rarely resolve conflict. You can win the point and still lose the connection. The brain isn't trying to be right. It's trying to restore emotional balance. Being understood calms the nervous system far more effectively than being proven wrong. Arguments escalate when emotional signals are ignored. When someone feels dismissed, the brain increases intensity to force acknowledgement. Volume, repetition, and accusation are attempts to break through emotional silence. The real message is often simple: listen, care, notice me. This pattern repeats because many people lack the language for emotional needs. Instead of saying, "I feel unimportant," or "I need reassurance," they argue about tone, timing, or trivial details. The conflict becomes safer than vulnerability. When emotional needs are met, arguments dissolve quickly. When they're ignored, even small disagreements feel explosive. What keeps arguments alive isn't disagreement, but the fear that one's feelings don't matter. The brain treats emotional pain like physical pain. The brain treats emotional pain like physical pain because, neurologically, it is processed through the same survival circuitry. Rejection, loss, humiliation, and abandonment activate the same regions that respond to injury and threat. To the brain, social pain is not symbolic. It is a direct signal that something is wrong, and it demands attention. This overlap exists because human survival has always depended on connection. Being excluded from the group once meant vulnerability, danger, and death. That ancient wiring remains intact. When emotional bonds are threatened, the nervous system reacts as if the body itself is under attack. Heart rate changes, stress hormones flood the system, and the urge to escape or shut down takes over. This is why emotional wounds linger. A broken bone heals with time, but emotional pain can be reopened by memory alone. The brain does not distinguish between a current threat and a vividly remembered one. Replaying an emotional injury can trigger the same physiological response as the original event, reinforcing fear and avoidance. It also explains why people underestimate emotional harm. Words like "just feelings" minimize what the brain experiences as real danger. Dismissing emotional pain invalidates the nervous system's alarm, increasing distress rather than reducing it. This mechanism shapes behavior in powerful ways. People avoid rejection, suppress emotions, or stay silent to prevent emotional injury, even at the cost of authenticity. The brain isn't overreacting. It is responding exactly as designed, treating emotional pain as a signal that survival, identity, or belonging is at risk. People believe stories more than facts. People believe stories more than facts because stories speak the brain's native language. Facts require effort, attention, and analysis. Stories require only emotion. When information is wrapped in narrative, the brain stops evaluating and starts experiencing. It doesn't just hear the message, it lives inside it. Stories activate emotion, imagery, and identity all at once. The mind doesn't ask whether the story is statistically accurate. It asks whether it feels true. If it aligns with personal experience, values, or fears, it becomes believable. Facts can be dismissed as cold or abstract, but stories feel human, and humans trust what feels human. This is why a single anecdote can outweigh mountains of data. Numbers stay in the mind briefly. Stories attach themselves to memory because they carry emotional weight. The brain remembers characters, struggle, and resolution far longer than percentages or charts. Emotion becomes the glue that makes belief stick. Stories also reduce resistance. Facts can challenge identity and trigger defensiveness. Stories bypass that defense by inviting empathy instead of argument. When someone identifies with a story, they adopt its meaning without realizing they've been persuaded. Belief forms quietly, without conscious debate. This mechanism is powerful and dangerous. Stories can enlighten or manipulate. They can inspire truth or spread distortion. Once a story is emotionally accepted, facts that contradict it feel like threats rather than information. The mind protects the narrative because it has already woven it into meaning, memory, and self-understanding. Nostalgia edits out the bad parts. Nostalgia edits out the bad parts because the brain protects emotional continuity by softening the past. Memory is not a recording. It is a reconstruction shaped by current needs. When the present feels uncertain or painful, the mind reaches backward and selectively highlights moments that feel warm, safe, or meaningful, while muting the discomfort that once existed alongside them. This happens because the brain associates familiar memories with identity. To preserve a sense of self, it smooths over contradictions. The arguments, boredom, anxiety, and loneliness that once felt real are blurred, while the laughter, closeness, and simplicity are sharpened. The past becomes emotionally curated, not historically accurate. Nostalgia also regulates emotion. It acts like a psychological anesthetic, offering comfort during stress. By idealizing what was, the brain creates a refuge from what is. This is why people romanticize old relationships, childhood, or earlier versions of themselves, even when those periods were marked by struggle. The mind remembers the relief of distance, not the weight of living through it. There is danger in this distortion. Edited memories can pull people backward, convincing them they lost something perfect rather than something complex. The pain that caused them to leave is forgotten, while the attachment remains. This fuels regret, longing, and false comparisons with the present. Nostalgia is not longing for the past as it was. It is longing for how remembering it makes you feel now. The brain isn't trying to tell the truth. It's trying to soothe you. Being ignored hurts more than being disliked. Being ignored hurts more than being disliked because rejection still acknowledges your existence while silence erases it. The human brain is wired for social connection, and being seen is a fundamental psychological need. When someone dislikes you, there is at least recognition. When you're ignored, the mind interprets it as social invisibility. From a survival perspective, exclusion was dangerous. Being ignored by the group meant vulnerability and isolation, so the brain evolved to treat it as a serious threat. This is why silence triggers anxiety more intensely than open conflict. Dislike can be confronted. Ignorance leaves nothing to hold on to. Being ignored creates a vacuum the mind desperately tries to fill. The brain searches for meaning, replaying interactions and inventing explanations. Without feedback, the nervous system stays activated, unable to resolve whether the threat is real or imagined. This uncertainty is what makes it so painful. Dislike gives boundaries. It tells you where you stand. Ignoring offers no clarity, only absence. The lack of response feels like a judgment without a verdict, leaving the mind suspended in self-doubt. It can quietly damage self-worth far more than direct criticism ever could. Silence also strips agency. You can't defend yourself against nothing. You can't respond to absence. This helplessness is what makes being ignored feel dehumanizing. The pain isn't about ego. It's about not being acknowledged as someone who matters. The brain doesn't just want approval, it wants recognition. And when that is withheld, the emotional impact cuts deeper than open rejection ever could. People listen to respond, not to understand. People listen to respond, not to understand, because the brain prioritizes self-protection over connection. While someone is speaking, the mind of the listener is often busy preparing its own reply, defense, or opinion. Instead of absorbing meaning, it scans for cues that threaten identity, beliefs, or status. Listening becomes a strategic pause rather than an act of presence. This happens because true understanding requires vulnerability. To fully hear someone, the brain must momentarily suspend judgment and certainty, and that feels unsafe. Letting information in without immediately organizing a response creates a sense of loss of control. So the mind fills the silence with planning, rehearsing, and positioning. Emotion intensifies this pattern. When a topic touches pride, fear, or insecurity, listening narrows even further. The nervous system shifts into protection mode, where being right feels more important than being open. Words are filtered, not received. Meaning is shaped to fit existing beliefs before it has a chance to challenge them. This is why conversations often feel shallow or circular. Both people are speaking, but neither feels heard. Each is responding to their own interpretation rather than the other person's reality. The disconnect isn't a lack of intelligence, but a lack of safety. Understanding requires slowing down, tolerating discomfort, and allowing another perspective to exist without immediate correction. The brain resists this because it feels inefficient and risky, so it chooses the faster option: respond first, process later, and protect the self at all costs. Self-awareness often comes after regret. Self-awareness often comes after regret because pain is what finally breaks denial. The mind avoids seeing its own flaws as long as it can protect self-image, but regret cuts through those defenses. When consequences arrive, reflection is no longer optional. The emotional weight forces the brain to look back at choices it once justified or ignored. Regret slows the mind down. In the moment of action, emotion and impulse dominate. Afterward, when the outcome is irreversible, the brain shifts into meaning-making mode. It searches for causes, patterns, and responsibility. That search often leads inward. Self-awareness emerges not from wisdom, but from loss, embarrassment, or missed opportunity. This is why advice rarely changes behavior, but consequences do. Hearing the truth feels abstract. Living the result makes it personal. Regret exposes the gap between intention and impact, between who someone thought they were and what they actually did. That gap becomes impossible to ignore once the cost is felt. The discomfort of regret also strips away excuses. Blame loses its power when the emotional burden remains. The mind begins to recognize repeated patterns, hidden motivations, and avoided truths. What was once invisible becomes obvious in hindsight. Self-awareness born from regret is heavy, but it is honest. It doesn't arrive gently. It arrives when the mind can no longer protect itself from reality. Awareness often isn't chosen. It's forced into existence by the pain of realizing too late what could have been done differently. Fear of judgment shapes most behavior. Fear of judgment shapes most behavior because humans are wired to survive through belonging. Long before logic or self-expression mattered, acceptance meant safety. Rejection meant danger. That ancient wiring still runs quietly beneath modern choices, steering behavior long before conscious reasoning steps in. The brain constantly scans social environments for cues of approval or disapproval. Every action, word, and decision is subtly filtered through a single question: How will this be perceived? This is why people soften opinions, hide ambitions, suppress emotions, and perform versions of themselves that feel acceptable rather than authentic. The nervous system learns that being judged threatens connection, and connection feels essential. Judgment doesn't have to be real to be powerful. Anticipated judgment is often enough. The brain imagines criticism, ridicule, or exclusion and responds as if it's already happening. This imagined threat triggers self-censorship, procrastination, and conformity. People don't need to be told not to stand out. They learn it through observation and memory. Fear of judgment also explains why people seek validation before taking risks. Approval acts as permission to exist freely. Without it, the mind hesitates, waiting for reassurance that may never come. Even success can feel unsafe if it invites scrutiny. Most limitations are not imposed externally, but internally enforced. The fear isn't of failure itself, but of being seen failing. Judgment threatens identity, and the brain will sacrifice growth to protect belonging. The mind resists change even when change is needed. The mind resists change even when change is needed because stability feels safer than improvement. The brain is designed to preserve what is familiar, not to evaluate what is optimal. Once a pattern is established, even a harmful one, it becomes encoded as known territory. Breaking that pattern signals uncertainty, and uncertainty is interpreted as risk. Change demands energy. It forces the brain to abandon automatic behavior and engage in conscious effort. That effort feels uncomfortable, exhausting, and destabilizing. Even when the current situation causes pain, the mind prefers it because it knows how to survive within it. Familiar discomfort is easier to tolerate than unfamiliar growth. This resistance is strongest when change threatens identity. Letting go of old habits, roles, or beliefs can feel like losing a part of yourself. The brain clings to the past because it offers continuity, even if that continuity limits potential. Staying the same preserves a sense of self, while change asks the question, who am I without this? Fear also plays a role. Change exposes the possibility of failure, regret, or loss. If you don't try, you don't have to face proof that something might not work. The mind uses resistance as a shield against disappointment. This is why insight alone rarely creates transformation. Knowing what needs to change doesn't override the brain's need for safety. Change begins only when discomfort with the current state outweighs fear of the unknown, and the nervous system learns that survival doesn't require staying the same. People confuse attachment with love. People confuse attachment with love because attachment feels intense, urgent, and emotionally consuming. The brain interprets intensity as importance, especially when fear is involved. Attachment is driven by anxiety, need, and the desire for security, while love is driven by choice, care, and emotional safety. But the nervous system often can't tell the difference when attachment is activated. Attachment forms when someone becomes a source of regulation. Their presence soothes anxiety, and their absence creates distress. The brain begins associating that person with relief from discomfort, not necessarily with genuine connection. This creates a bond rooted in dependency rather than mutual understanding. The stronger the emotional swings, the more powerful the attachment feels. Love, on the other hand, is calm and expansive, which can feel unfamiliar to a nervous system conditioned to chaos. Stability doesn't trigger the same adrenaline or fear, so it can be mistaken for boredom. Attachment keeps the brain in a constant state of alertness, interpreting obsession, jealousy, and longing as proof of depth. This confusion is reinforced by early emotional experiences. If love was inconsistent or conditional, attachment becomes the blueprint for connection. The brain learns that love means uncertainty, longing, and emotional tension. Anything peaceful feels unreal. Attachment demands, love allows. Attachment fears loss, love trusts presence. But because attachment activates powerful survival circuits, it often feels more intense than love ever does. The brain mistakes that intensity for meaning, not realizing it is responding to fear of abandonment, not genuine emotional connection. Validation can be more addictive than success. Validation can be more addictive than success because it directly feeds the brain's need for acceptance, not achievement. Success satisfies a goal. Validation satisfies identity. When approval is given, the brain releases dopamine tied to social reward, signaling safety, belonging, and worth. That chemical response can become more powerful than the satisfaction of actual progress. Success often requires effort, patience, and delayed gratification. Validation is immediate. A compliment, a like, attention, or praise delivers instant emotional relief. The brain learns this pattern quickly. It begins to crave the feeling of being seen and approved more than the slower, quieter fulfillment of real accomplishment. Validation also shifts motivation. Instead of asking, "What do I want to build?" the mind starts asking, "How will this be received?" Behavior becomes shaped by external reaction rather than internal direction. Over time, self-worth becomes dependent on feedback. Without it, anxiety rises, doubt grows, and momentum collapses. This addiction is subtle because validation feels harmless. It looks like confidence, ambition, or connection. But the dependency forms when identity relies on constant reassurance. The absence of validation begins to feel like failure, even when progress is being made privately. The brain prioritizes social survival over personal growth. Being approved of feels safer than standing alone in achievement. This is why people abandon meaningful paths if they don't receive recognition, and why they chase applause, even when it pulls them away from what actually matters. Validation doesn't build resilience. It trains the mind to need permission to feel enough. The brain seeks patterns, even where none exist. The brain seeks patterns, even where none exist, because uncertainty feels intolerable. From a survival standpoint, randomness is dangerous. Early humans who detected patterns quickly were more likely to avoid threats, even if those patterns were sometimes false. That bias never left. The mind would rather be wrong with a pattern than helpless in chaos. Pattern seeking gives the brain a sense of control. When events feel disconnected or unpredictable, the mind connects them anyway. Coincidences become meaning, timing becomes fate, and isolated outcomes are woven into narratives. This isn't logic failing. It's the nervous system trying to stabilize itself by creating order. This is why people see intention where there is none, assume causation from correlation, and assign motives without evidence. The brain hates empty space. Silence, randomness, and ambiguity are filled automatically. It's emotionally easier to believe something is happening for a reason than to accept that some things simply happen. Pattern seeking also protects identity. When something goes wrong, the mind searches for explanations that preserve a sense of self. Blame, destiny, or hidden motives feel more tolerable than accepting unpredictability. Meaning becomes a coping mechanism. This tendency shapes beliefs, relationships, and decisions. People misread signals, overinterpret behavior, and build entire worldviews on perceived patterns that feel real because they reduce anxiety. The danger isn't that the brain looks for patterns. It's that once a pattern is found, the mind clings to it, even when evidence disappears. Certainty feels safer than truth, and the brain will choose safety first. People mirror emotions subconsciously. Because the human brain is built to synchronize with others. Long before language, emotional attunement was how safety, threat, and belonging were communicated. When someone enters a room anxious, calm, excited, or withdrawn, the nervous systems around them begin adjusting automatically, often without awareness. This happens through emotional contagion. Facial expressions, tone of voice, posture, and energy are processed faster than words. The brain reads these cues and mirrors them to maintain social alignment. This is why moods spread so easily and why one emotionally charged person can shift the atmosphere of an entire group. Mirror neurons play a central role in this process. They activate when we observe others, allowing us to internally experience a version of their emotional state. This mechanism helps humans empathize, bond, and predict behavior. Feeling what others feel strengthens connection, but it also makes emotions highly transferable. Because this process is unconscious, people often believe their emotional state is self-generated when it's not. Stress, irritation, or excitement can be absorbed simply by proximity. This is why emotional environments matter more than most people realize. Emotionally expressive individuals tend to influence others more strongly. Their feelings broadcast clearly, giving the brain more data to mirror. Calm, grounded emotions can regulate a room, while anxiety can quietly escalate it. This mirroring is not imitation, it's regulation. The nervous system seeks harmony. Whoever controls their emotional state most consistently often becomes the emotional reference point for others, shaping interactions without ever saying a word. Boredom often masks dissatisfaction. Boredom often masks dissatisfaction because the brain avoids naming deeper discomfort when it feels overwhelming or unclear. Saying you're bored feels neutral and safe, while admitting dissatisfaction forces confrontation with unmet needs, stalled growth, or misalignment. The mind chooses the simpler label to reduce emotional friction. Boredom is not the absence of stimulation, but the absence of meaning. When daily actions no longer connect to purpose, curiosity, or emotional engagement, the brain disengages to conserve energy. This disengagement feels like restlessness, apathy, or numbness. It's easier to call that boredom than to admit something important feels off. Dissatisfaction threatens identity. Acknowledging it might mean questioning relationships, careers, routines, or choices that once felt right. That level of reflection carries risk, so the brain dulls awareness instead. Boredom becomes a buffer between consciousness and uncomfortable truth. This is why constant distraction doesn't cure boredom. More stimulation only masks the signal temporarily. The underlying dissatisfaction remains, growing louder in moments of stillness. The brain is not craving entertainment, it's craving alignment. Boredom also protects against disappointment. If you label your discomfort as boredom, you don't have to admit desire. Desire creates vulnerability because wanting something means facing the possibility of not getting it. Boredom feels passive, but dissatisfaction is active and demanding. The mind uses boredom as a quiet alarm, not to annoy you, but to signal that something meaningful is being neglected. We assume others think about us more than they do. We assume others think about us more than they do because the mind places itself at the center of its own experience. You live inside your thoughts, your mistakes, your appearance, your words, so the brain quietly assumes everyone else is doing the same. This creates an illusion of constant observation, even when none exists. The brain uses itself as the reference point for reality. Since your actions feel loud and significant to you, it overestimates their impact on others. A small slip, an awkward moment, or a single comment can replay endlessly in your mind while everyone else has already moved on. Their attention shifted the moment something else demanded it. This bias is intensified by insecurity. When self-worth feels fragile, the mind becomes hyper-aware of social cues. Neutral expressions are interpreted as judgment. Silence becomes disapproval. The brain fills the gap by assuming scrutiny, because being noticed feels more plausible than being irrelevant. In reality, most people are consumed by their own internal narratives. They are replaying their own mistakes, worrying about their own image, and navigating their own anxieties. Your presence is brief in their mental space, often no longer than the moment you're interacting with them. Believing others are constantly thinking about you creates unnecessary pressure. It fuels self-censorship, overthinking, and fear of exposure. The truth is quieter and less dramatic. People are not watching as closely as the mind imagines. They are too busy being the main character in their own thoughts to stay focused on yours. People remember criticism more than praise. People remember criticism more than praise because the brain is wired to prioritize threat over comfort. From an evolutionary standpoint, praise never kept anyone alive, but criticism often signaled danger, correction, or potential rejection. The mind learned to hold on to negative feedback tightly, treating it as information necessary for survival. When criticism is received, the nervous system activates, heart rate shifts, attention narrows, and memory sharpens. The brain flags the moment as important, storing it with emotional intensity. Praise, while pleasant, doesn't trigger the same alert system. It feels good, but it doesn't demand vigilance, so it fades faster. Criticism also interacts with identity. Even a single negative comment can threaten self-image, making the mind replay it repeatedly in an attempt to resolve the discomfort. The brain asks, "Is this true?" and keeps returning to the question, reinforcing the memory each time. Praise rarely provokes that kind of internal interrogation. This imbalance explains why 10 compliments can be erased by one cutting remark. The mind treats criticism as a warning label, while praise feels optional. It also explains why people remember insults from years ago, but forget kind words from yesterday. The danger lies in internalization. Repeated criticism becomes internal dialogue, shaping self-perception long after the speaker is gone. The brain doesn't remember criticism because it enjoys pain. It remembers it because it's trying to protect you from future harm, even when that protection becomes the harm itself. Control feels safer than trust. Control feels safer than trust because control creates the illusion of certainty. When you control outcomes, people, or environments, the brain believes it can prevent pain. Trust, on the other hand, requires surrendering that illusion and accepting vulnerability. The nervous system interprets that surrender as exposure, even when the risk is minimal. Control reduces anxiety by narrowing possibilities. If everything is managed, predicted, or contained, the mind doesn't have to prepare for surprise. Trust opens the door to unpredictability, and unpredictability activates fear. This is why people micromanage, overplan, or emotionally withhold. Control becomes a coping mechanism disguised as responsibility. Past experiences reinforce this pattern. When trust has been broken, the brain learns that relying on others leads to harm. Control then becomes a form of self-protection. It feels empowering, but it's driven by fear rather than strength. The mind equates control with safety, even when it damages connection. Emotionally, control keeps people distant. It prevents disappointment, but also prevents intimacy. Trust requires allowing others to impact you, and impact means risk. The brain would rather manage loneliness than risk betrayal. The problem is that control is exhausting. It demands constant vigilance and creates tension in the body. Trust, while uncomfortable at first, allows the nervous system to rest. But rest feels unfamiliar to a mind trained to survive. Letting go of control doesn't mean recklessness. It means accepting that safety doesn't come from managing everything, but from knowing you can handle whatever happens. The brain avoids uncertainty at all costs. The brain avoids uncertainty at all costs because uncertainty signals potential danger. When outcomes are unclear, the nervous system cannot predict what comes next, and prediction is how the brain maintains a sense of control. Even negative certainty feels safer than open-ended possibility, because at least the threat is known. From an evolutionary standpoint, uncertainty meant vulnerability. Not knowing where food, safety, or allies were could be fatal. That wiring still governs modern behavior. Ambiguity triggers stress responses, increasing anxiety and narrowing focus. The brain scrambles to close the gap, even if the explanation it chooses is inaccurate or harmful. This is why people cling to rigid beliefs, stay in unhealthy situations, or rush decisions they aren't ready for. Certainty provides relief. It quiets the nervous system. The mind would rather settle for a painful answer than tolerate the tension of not knowing. Doubt feels like exposure, and exposure feels unsafe. Uncertainty also threatens identity. When outcomes are unknown, the self feels undefined. The brain prefers fixed narratives because they offer psychological ground to stand on. Letting go of certainty means letting go of who you think you are, even temporarily. To escape uncertainty, the mind fills gaps with assumptions, worst-case scenarios, or false confidence. These may be inaccurate, but they are emotionally stabilizing. The brain is not chasing truth, it is chasing relief. Until safety is felt internally, uncertainty will always feel like something to escape rather than something to explore. Comfort zones shrink when avoided too long. Comfort zones shrink when avoided too long because the brain recalibrates safety based on recent experience, not potential. What once felt manageable becomes intimidating when it is not revisited. The nervous system doesn't preserve confidence in storage. It updates its definition of safe according to what you repeatedly do or don't do. Avoidance teaches the brain that something is dangerous. Each time you stay away, the mind interprets relief as proof that avoidance worked. That relief is rewarded, reinforcing the behavior. Over time, the area of life you avoid doesn't stay the same size. It expands. What began as one uncomfortable action turns into multiple restricted behaviors. This is how comfort zones contract. The brain becomes overprotective, tightening boundaries to prevent perceived threats. Social situations feel harder, challenges feel heavier, risk feels larger than it actually is. The nervous system hasn't grown weaker, it has become conditioned to expect harm where none may exist. Re-entry feels harder because the brain has lost recent evidence of safety. Without that evidence, anxiety spikes. The unfamiliarity amplifies fear, even if the task itself hasn't changed. What changed is the mind's tolerance. Growth requires repeated exposure. Confidence is not maintained by thinking about it, but by using it. When action stops, the comfort zone doesn't stay neutral. It slowly collapses inward, leaving less room to move. Avoidance doesn't keep you safe. It quietly makes your world smaller. People fear being seen more than being wrong. People fear being seen more than being wrong because being seen threatens identity, while being wrong only threatens accuracy. The brain can correct mistakes quietly, but exposure feels permanent. When someone is truly seen, opinions, flaws, desires, uncertainty, it activates a deeper vulnerability than error ever could. Being wrong can be fixed. Being seen can be judged. This fear is rooted in social survival. Visibility invites evaluation, and evaluation risks rejection. The nervous system treats attention as a spotlight where flaws feel magnified. It's safer to stay partially hidden, to blend in, to be incorrect privately than authentic publicly. The brain prioritizes concealment over correction. This is why people hesitate to speak up, share ideas, or show emotion, even when they know they're right. Being wrong can be laughed off. Being seen requires standing behind something personal. It exposes values, intelligence, competence, and worth all at once. The risk feels heavier. Being seen also removes control. Once something is visible, it can be interpreted, misunderstood, or used against you. The mind prefers mistakes it can manage over exposure it cannot retract. This leads to silence, conformity, and self-editing that feels safer than authenticity. Ironically, being seen is also what creates connection, but the brain doesn't optimize for fulfillment. It optimizes for safety. So people hide brilliance, softness, ambition, and truth, not because they doubt it, but because visibility feels more dangerous than error. Being wrong bruises the ego. Being seen feels like risking the self. Emotional wounds influence future choices silently. Emotional wounds influence future choices silently because the brain learns from pain faster than from logic. When an experience causes emotional harm, the nervous system records it as a threat and adjusts behavior to avoid repeating it. This happens beneath conscious awareness, shaping decisions long before rational thought is involved. The mind doesn't need reminders. It remembers tone, timing, and the emotional aftermath. Similar situations trigger subtle stress responses, guiding choices away from perceived danger. What feels like intuition is often unhealed memory steering behavior. The body reacts first, and the mind explains later. This is why people avoid opportunities that resemble past failures, withdraw from intimacy after betrayal, or self-sabotage when success feels unfamiliar. The wound isn't loud, but it's persuasive. It whispers caution, not truth. The brain believes it's protecting you, even when it's limiting you. Because these wounds operate quietly, people often misinterpret their reactions. Fear becomes preference. Avoidance becomes logic. The emotional origin remains hidden, so patterns repeat without being questioned. The past disguises itself as personality. Emotional wounds also influence standards. What someone tolerates, demands, or fears is often calibrated by earlier pain. Unhealed experiences narrow possibility, making survival the priority over fulfillment. Healing requires bringing these silent influences into awareness. Once named, their power weakens, but until then, emotional wounds continue to make decisions behind the scenes, shaping futures based on past pain rather than present reality. People prefer simple explanations over true ones. People prefer simple explanations over true ones because simplicity reduces cognitive and emotional strain. The brain is constantly managing limited energy, and complex truths demand effort, nuance, and uncertainty. Simple explanations feel clean, complete, and emotionally satisfying, even when they distort reality. True explanations are often layered, uncomfortable, and incomplete. They require holding multiple possibilities at once and accepting that not everything has a clear cause or villain. The brain resists this because ambiguity triggers anxiety. A simple story provides closure, and closure calms the nervous system. It offers a sense of control, even if that control is built on illusion. This is why people gravitate toward labels, stereotypes, and single-cause narratives. They turn complex human behavior into something easily digestible. They're lazy. It failed because of bad luck. Or, that's just how they are, replaces deeper understanding. The mind isn't searching for accuracy, it's searching for relief from mental tension. Emotion plays a central role. When something hurts, a simple explanation protects identity. It prevents deeper self-examination that might reveal regret, responsibility, or vulnerability. The truth might require change, and change threatens stability. Simplicity allows people to move on without transforming. Simple explanations spread faster because they feel intuitive. They require no emotional investment, only acceptance. The brain rewards them with certainty and speed. Truth, on the other hand, asks for patience and discomfort, and for a mind wired to avoid both, simplicity will almost always win. The brain prioritizes short-term relief over long-term growth. The brain prioritizes short-term relief over long-term growth because its primary job is to reduce discomfort now, not to optimize fulfillment later. Immediate relief signals safety to the nervous system. Growth, on the other hand, requires uncertainty, effort, and temporary pain. Faced with that choice, the brain almost always chooses what soothes fastest. This preference is rooted in survival wiring. In dangerous environments, immediate comfort increased chances of staying alive. Delayed rewards were irrelevant if survival wasn't guaranteed. That instinct remains active, even when the threat is emotional rather than physical. Stress, fear, boredom, and discomfort trigger the brain to seek the quickest escape. Short-term relief comes in many forms: distraction, avoidance, numbing, procrastination, reassurance. Each provides an instant reduction in tension. The brain rewards this with dopamine, reinforcing the behavior. Long-term growth offers no immediate payoff. Its rewards are distant, abstract, and uncertain, making them less appealing to an anxious nervous system. This is why people choose what feels good now over what builds strength later. The mind convinces itself that relief is necessary, even when it comes at the cost of progress. Over time, this creates a cycle where discomfort is avoided rather than processed, and growth is delayed indefinitely. The brain doesn't resist growth because it's harmful. It resists growth because growth feels unsafe in the moment. Relief quiets the alarm. Growth requires sitting with it. Without conscious effort, the brain will always choose the path that reduces pain fastest, even if it keeps you exactly where you are. Confidence is learned, not innate. Confidence is learned, not innate, because the brain builds certainty through evidence, not birthright. No one arrives knowing they are capable. Confidence emerges when the nervous system repeatedly experiences action without catastrophic consequences. It is not a personality trait, it is a conditioned response to survival data. The brain learns confidence the same way it learns fear, through exposure, repetition, and interpretation. Each time a person acts and survives discomfort, the nervous system updates its expectations. What once felt threatening becomes familiar. What felt impossible becomes manageable. Confidence is simply the memory of resilience being recalled in advance. This is why confidence fluctuates across situations. Someone can feel powerful in one environment and invisible in another. The difference is not identity, but learned safety. Where the brain has proof of competence, confidence appears. Where it lacks experience, hesitation fills the gap. Early experiences shape this learning. Encouragement, autonomy, and recovery from failure teach the brain that effort does not equal danger. Conversely, punishment and humiliation teach avoidance. But learned patterns are not permanent. The brain remains plastic. New experiences can rewrite old conclusions. Confidence grows quietly. It forms in moments no one applauds, when action is taken despite uncertainty. Over time, the nervous system stops treating challenge as threat. What looks like natural confidence from the outside is often the result of repeated self-trust built through discomfort. Confidence isn't something you are born with, it's something your brain learns is allowed. We justify habits that harm us. We justify habits that harm us because the brain is more invested in consistency than well-being. Once a behavior becomes familiar, the mind works to protect it, even when it causes damage. Letting go of a habit threatens identity, routine, and emotional comfort, so the brain reshapes reality to make the habit feel reasonable. This justification is a defense mechanism. Admitting a habit is harmful would require change, effort, and discomfort. Instead, the mind minimizes consequences, compares downward, or reframes the behavior as deserved, temporary or necessary. Logic is recruited not to tell the truth, but to reduce internal conflict. Habits often serve an emotional purpose before they become destructive. They soothe anxiety, numb pain, or create a sense of control. The brain remembers the relief, not the cost. Over time, the habit becomes associated with safety, even as it slowly erodes health, relationships, or self-respect. Because of this, people defend habits they openly criticize in others. Awareness exists, but emotional attachment overrides it. The brain prefers a familiar coping mechanism over an uncertain alternative, even if that alternative is healthier. Justification also protects self-image. Accepting harm would mean admitting vulnerability or poor judgment. Rationalizing allows the mind to stay intact while the behavior continues. Change becomes possible only when the discomfort caused by the habit outweighs the comfort it provides. Until then, the brain will keep explaining away the damage to avoid confronting the loss of what once felt like relief. People often want permission, not advice. People often want permission, not advice, because advice implies direction, while permission provides emotional safety. When someone shares a dilemma, the mind is rarely undecided about what it wants. More often, it is afraid of the consequences of choosing it. Asking for advice becomes a way to test whether a choice will be socially or emotionally acceptable. The brain is deeply sensitive to rejection and judgment. Acting alone means carrying full responsibility for the outcome. Permission spreads that weight. If someone else validates the choice, the nervous system relaxes. The decision feels safer, not because it's better, but because it's no longer made in isolation. Advice forces confrontation with reality. Permission soothes anxiety without requiring immediate change. This is why people often ignore practical guidance, but cling to statements that affirm what they already feel. They are listening for reassurance, not strategy. The brain wants relief first, solutions second. This pattern is shaped by social conditioning. Approval has always been tied to belonging. When choices risk disrupting relationships, identity, or self-image, the brain seeks external confirmation before acting. Permission functions as a psychological shield against guilt and fear. Offering unsolicited advice can feel invalidating because it skips over this emotional need. What calms the nervous system is not being told what to do, but being told it's okay to want what you want. Once permission is felt, clarity often follows. The mind was never lacking information. It was lacking safety to choose. The brain confuses intensity with importance. The brain confuses intensity with importance because strong emotional signals demand immediate attention. Intensity feels urgent, and urgency feels meaningful. When something triggers fear, excitement, anger, or desire, the nervous system flags it as critical, regardless of whether it truly matters in the long term. This confusion comes from how the brain prioritizes information. Emotional intensity activates survival circuits designed to respond quickly. The louder the signal, the more important it feels. Calm, stable, or subtle experiences don't generate the same neurological response, so they are often overlooked, even when they are far more significant. This is why drama feels meaningful, even when it's empty. Why chaos feels alive, while peace feels dull. Why toxic relationships can feel more important than healthy ones. Intensity floods the brain with stimulation, creating the illusion of depth. The mind mistakes emotional spikes for value. Intensity also narrows focus. When emotions run high, the brain reduces perspective. Everything else fades into the background. This tunnel vision reinforces the belief that whatever is causing the intensity must matter most, even if it's temporary or destructive. Over time, this pattern trains people to chase emotional highs and avoid emotional quiet. Stability feels unimportant because it doesn't stimulate the nervous system. The brain isn't seeking meaning, it's responding to volume. And the loudest experiences aren't always the ones that deserve the most attention. Most people don't change unless pain outweighs comfort. Most people don't change unless pain outweighs comfort because the brain is designed to conserve energy, not pursue growth. Familiar routines, even harmful ones, feel efficient. They require less emotional effort, less uncertainty, and less risk. Comfort tells the nervous system that survival is stable, so there is no urgency to adapt. Change disrupts predictability. It demands attention, vulnerability, and the possibility of failure. The brain resists this disruption until staying the same becomes more painful than moving forward. As long as discomfort remains tolerable, the mind justifies delay. It reframes dissatisfaction as manageable, temporary, or normal. Pain acts as a signal strong enough to override this resistance. Emotional loss, repeated failure, or internal collapse forces awareness the brain can no longer suppress. When comfort erodes, avoidance stops working. The nervous system shifts from preservation to action because inaction now feels unsafe. This is why advice rarely changes people. Information alone doesn't register as threat. Pain does. Real change is rarely motivated by insight. It is motivated by necessity. The brain moves when it believes survival, identity, or belonging is at risk. There is tragedy in this mechanism. People often endure years of quiet dissatisfaction because it feels safer than uncertainty. They wait for breaking points instead of listening to early signals. Growth doesn't begin when change feels good. It begins when staying the same hurts too much to ignore. Overthinking is the brain trying to protect you. Overthinking is the brain trying to protect you because uncertainty triggers the nervous system's threat response. When outcomes are unclear, the mind scans for danger, replaying scenarios in an attempt to predict and prevent pain. What feels like mental chaos is actually the brain working overtime to keep you safe. The brain evolved to anticipate threats before they happen. Overthinking is an extension of that survival mechanism. By analyzing every possibility, the mind believes it can reduce risk. Each thought feels like preparation, even when it only increases anxiety. The intention is safety, not suffering. Overthinking intensifies when something matters emotionally. Relationships, decisions, and identity-related situations activate deeper fears of loss, rejection, or failure. The brain responds by looping, trying to gain control through information. Thinking becomes a substitute for action because action carries visible risk. The problem is that the brain can't think its way into certainty. More thoughts don't create clarity. They create exhaustion. The nervous system stays activated, mistaking constant mental movement for protection. Rest feels unsafe because vigilance has become the norm. Many people mistake overthinking for intelligence or responsibility, reinforcing the habit. But it's driven by fear, not insight. The mind is trying to protect you from imagined pain by staying alert. Real safety comes when the nervous system learns that uncertainty isn't dangerous. Until then, overthinking persists as a protective reflex, keeping the brain busy to avoid the discomfort of not knowing. People believe what aligns with identity. People believe what aligns with identity because beliefs are not just ideas, they are anchors for the self. The brain treats identity as something that must be protected at all costs. When a belief supports who someone thinks they are, it feels safe, grounding, and emotionally stabilizing. When a belief threatens identity, the nervous system reacts as if under attack. This is why evidence alone rarely changes minds. Information that contradicts identity creates psychological danger. Accepting it would mean admitting error, losing status, or questioning one's sense of self. The brain responds by rejecting, minimizing, or rationalizing the information away. It is not defending truth, it is defending coherence. Beliefs tied to identity become emotional, not logical. They carry memories, values, and social belonging. Challenging them feels like challenging the person themselves. The brain prefers internal consistency over external accuracy because consistency maintains a stable self-image. This mechanism explains why people double down when confronted, even in the face of overwhelming facts. Admitting they are wrong would fracture the narrative they live inside. The mind chooses certainty over correctness, familiarity over growth. Identity-aligned beliefs also provide belonging. Shared beliefs signal group membership, and belonging has always been tied to survival. To abandon those beliefs risks isolation, so the brain filters reality, accepting what reinforces identity and resisting what threatens it. What someone believes is often less about truth and more about who they are allowed to be if they believe it. The mind remembers beginnings and endings best. The mind remembers beginnings and endings best because memory is shaped by emotional peaks, not equal moments. The brain doesn't record experiences like a camera. It compresses them into highlights, and the strongest impressions usually occur at the start and the finish. Those moments carry the most emotional weight, so they become anchors in memory. Beginnings matter because they set expectations. The brain uses the first moments to decide whether something is safe, interesting, or threatening. That initial emotional imprint frames everything that follows. Once a perception is formed, later information is filtered through it, often unconsciously. Endings matter because they provide closure. The final moments determine how the experience is stored and recalled. A strong ending can redeem a weak middle, while a bad ending can overshadow everything that came before. The brain prioritizes how something concludes because it signals whether the overall experience was rewarding or costly. This is why first impressions are powerful and why final words linger. Long stretches of neutral or even positive experience fade, while the opening and closing dominate recall. The middle becomes compressed or forgotten unless it contains emotional spikes. The brain does this to save energy. It simplifies complex experiences into emotional summaries. What you remember most isn't what lasted the longest, but what felt most defining at the start and the end. Those moments shape reputation, memory, and meaning long after the details disappear. Avoidance strengthens fear. Avoidance strengthens fear because the brain learns from what you don't face as much as from what you do. When something triggers anxiety and is avoided, the nervous system interprets the relief that follows as proof that the threat was real. The fear isn't reduced, it's rewarded. This creates a powerful learning loop. The brain associates avoidance with safety and exposure with danger. Each time you step away from discomfort, the mind reinforces the belief that the feared situation is something you cannot handle. The relief feels calming in the moment, but it quietly trains the nervous system to panic faster next time. Fear thrives on imagination. When something is avoided, the brain fills in the unknown with worst-case scenarios. Without real-world evidence to challenge the fear, the threat grows larger, more abstract, and more overwhelming. What was once manageable becomes intolerable simply because it remains untested. Avoidance also shrinks perceived capability. The mind concludes not only that the situation is dangerous, but that you are fragile. Confidence erodes as fear expands. This is why fears spread. Avoiding one situation makes similar situations feel unsafe too. Facing fear doesn't eliminate discomfort, but it changes the lesson the brain learns. Exposure teaches resilience. Avoidance teaches helplessness. The fear isn't powerful because the situation is dangerous. It's powerful because the brain has been taught repeatedly that escape is the only safe option. People fear abandonment more than loneliness. People fear abandonment more than loneliness because abandonment carries rejection, while loneliness carries absence. Loneliness can be explained by circumstance, but abandonment feels personal. It signals that someone chose to leave, and the brain interprets that choice as a threat to worth and survival. From early development, connection equals safety. When attachment is threatened, the nervous system activates panic responses designed to restore closeness. Abandonment triggers this system far more intensely than solitude because it implies loss of protection, love, or belonging. The pain isn't about being alone, it's about being left. This fear shapes behavior in subtle ways. People tolerate mistreatment, suppress needs, or stay silent to avoid triggering distance. The brain calculates that compromised connection is safer than none at all. Loneliness feels manageable. Abandonment feels like danger. Emotionally, abandonment reopens early attachment wounds. It echoes moments when connection felt unstable or conditional. The body remembers those experiences, even if the mind doesn't. Current relationships activate old fears, making separation feel catastrophic. This is why people cling, chase closure, or struggle to let go even when a relationship is clearly harmful. The nervous system prioritizes connection over well-being. Fear overrides logic. Healing this fear requires redefining safety. When someone learns they can survive separation without losing their sense of self, abandonment loses its power. Until then, the brain will choose connection at any cost because being left feels more threatening than being alone. Being needed can feel like being loved. Being needed can feel like being loved because the brain confuses usefulness with connection. When someone depends on you, it creates a sense of importance and security. The nervous system interprets that dependence as proof of value. If you are needed, you are less likely to be abandoned, and to the brain, that feels like safety. This feeling is especially powerful for people whose sense of worth was tied to contribution early in life. If love was conditional, given in exchange for support, stability, or sacrifice, the brain learns that care must be earned. Being needed becomes the currency for connection. Love stops feeling like something freely given and starts feeling like something maintained through effort. Needing creates structure. It gives you a role, a purpose, and a reason to stay. The brain finds comfort in that clarity. Love, in its healthy form, is less demanding and more spacious, which can feel unfamiliar or even threatening. Without being needed, the mind may ask, why would they stay? This is why people remain in imbalanced relationships where they are relied on but not deeply seen. The anxiety of being unnecessary feels worse than the exhaustion of being required. The nervous system chooses the familiar reassurance of dependency over the uncertainty of mutual love. Being needed also feeds identity. It allows someone to avoid confronting their own emptiness or unmet needs by focusing on someone else's. But need is not the same as care. Need can disappear when circumstances change. Love doesn't require constant usefulness. It requires presence, choice, and emotional safety. But when the brain equates survival with being indispensable, being needed can feel indistinguishable from being loved. The brain resists information that challenges beliefs. The brain resists information that challenges beliefs because beliefs are not just ideas, they are psychological anchors. They organize identity, predict the world, and create a sense of stability. When new information threatens them, the brain doesn't treat it as data. It treats it as danger. Beliefs help the mind conserve energy. They reduce uncertainty by offering ready-made explanations. Challenging a belief means reopening questions the brain thought were settled. That requires effort, emotional discomfort, and the possibility of being wrong. The nervous system reacts defensively, prioritizing emotional safety over accuracy. When confronted with conflicting information, the brain activates protective mechanisms. Evidence is minimized, reinterpreted, or dismissed. Sources are attacked. Motives are questioned. This isn't a conscious decision. It's an automatic response designed to preserve coherence and self-worth. Beliefs are often tied to identity. Changing them can feel like losing a part of oneself or betraying a group. The social cost of being wrong can feel heavier than the intellectual cost of staying incorrect. The brain chooses belonging over truth when forced to pick between the two. This resistance creates blind spots. The mind becomes selective, absorbing only what fits the existing narrative. Contradictory facts feel irritating, threatening, or insulting rather than informative. The brain isn't trying to be irrational. It's trying to stay intact in a world where certainty feels safer than revision. People feel safer with certainty than truth. People feel safer with certainty than truth because certainty calms the nervous system, while truth often destabilizes it. The brain is not designed to seek accuracy first. It is designed to seek safety. Certainty provides clean edges, clear explanations, and emotional closure. Truth, especially complex or uncomfortable truth, introduces ambiguity, and ambiguity feels like a threat. Certainty reduces cognitive load. When the mind believes it already knows what something means, it can relax. Questions stop looping. Doubt quiets down. Even if the belief is flawed, the sense of knowing creates emotional relief. Truth, on the other hand, often demands revision of identity, beliefs, or past choices. That kind of adjustment feels costly to the brain. This is why people cling to simple narratives, rigid opinions, and absolute explanations. They aren't always defending facts, they're defending emotional stability. Uncertainty forces the brain to stay alert, and constant alertness is exhausting. Certainty offers rest, even if it's built on illusion. The brain also associates certainty with control. Knowing, or believing you know, creates the feeling that outcomes are predictable. Truth can remove that illusion. It can reveal randomness, limitations, or lack of control, all of which activate anxiety. The mind would rather feel grounded in something solid than exposed to complexity. This is why misinformation spreads faster than nuance, and why confident falsehoods often outperform hesitant truths. Certainty feels protective, truth feels demanding, and in moments of stress, fear, or identity threat, the brain will choose emotional safety over factual accuracy without hesitation. Familiar environments shape personality. Familiar environments shape personality because the brain adapts to survive where it spends the most time. Personality is not formed in isolation. It is shaped by repeated emotional conditions, expectations, and constraints. Over time, the mind learns which traits are rewarded, which are punished, and which are necessary to stay safe. The nervous system calibrates itself to its surroundings. In unpredictable environments, vigilance becomes personality. In critical environments, self-doubt becomes personality. In emotionally distant spaces, emotional restraint becomes personality. These traits don't begin as choices. They begin as adaptations. The brain is efficient. Once it learns how to function in a specific environment, it reinforces those behaviors until they feel like identity. What started as coping becomes character. People often believe this is who they are, not realizing it's who they had to become. This is why people act differently in different settings. A person who feels confident in one environment may feel small in another. The environment activates learned patterns, not fixed traits. Personality shifts when safety shifts. Familiar environments are powerful because they rarely challenge these patterns. Repetition normalizes them. Growth feels uncomfortable, not because it's wrong, but because it disrupts learned survival strategies. When environments change, personality often follows. Given enough emotional safety, traits like confidence, openness, or assertiveness can emerge naturally. Who you are is not static. It's shaped, reinforced, and reshaped by where you spend your emotional life. Emotional intelligence predicts success better than IQ. Emotional intelligence predicts success better than IQ because the brain operates in social environments before it operates in logical ones. Intelligence may solve problems, but emotional intelligence determines which problems you're trusted to solve. The ability to read emotions, regulate reactions, and navigate relationships directly influences opportunity, influence, and resilience. The brain is constantly scanning for emotional cues. People instinctively respond to how safe, understood, and respected they feel around someone. High emotional intelligence creates calm in others, and calm builds trust. Trust opens doors long before raw intellect does. A brilliant mind without emotional awareness can trigger defensiveness, while an emotionally attuned person can move entire rooms. Success also depends on regulation. Stress, rejection, and uncertainty are unavoidable. Emotional intelligence allows the nervous system to recover quickly instead of spiraling. It prevents impulsive reactions that damage credibility and relationships. The brain rewards those who can stay grounded under pressure because stability signals reliability. IQ operates best in controlled environments. Real life is not controlled. It is emotional, unpredictable, and relational. Navigating conflict, motivating others, handling failure, and adapting to feedback require emotional fluency, not just cognitive ability. Emotionally intelligent people also learn faster. They recognize their own blind spots without collapsing into shame. This self-awareness accelerates growth. The brain resists learning when identity feels threatened, but emotional intelligence softens that threat. Intelligence may get attention, but emotional intelligence sustains momentum. The brain does not elevate those who are smartest. It elevates those who can understand, manage, and move people, starting with themselves. People seek validation from those who withhold it. People seek validation from those who withhold it because scarcity amplifies perceived value. When approval is inconsistent or unavailable, the brain flags it as important. Attention that is freely given feels ordinary. Attention that is withheld feels meaningful, even if it comes from someone who offers little else. This pattern is driven by uncertainty. The nervous system becomes hyper-focused on unpredictable sources of validation because it wants resolution. Inconsistency creates tension, and the brain seeks to relieve that tension by earning approval. Each small sign of validation feels like a win, triggering dopamine and reinforcing the pursuit. Withholding validation also activates self-doubt. The mind begins to question its worth and assumes the other person holds the answer. Validation becomes a way to restore balance and confirm value. The less it is given, the more powerful it feels. The brain mistakes emotional deprivation for importance. This dynamic often forms in early experiences where love, attention, or approval was conditional. The nervous system learns to associate effort and anxiety with connection. Familiar patterns are repeated in adulthood, even when they are harmful, because they feel recognizable. The pursuit isn't really about the other person. It's about resolving internal uncertainty. Validation from someone who withholds it feels like proof of worth. The brain doesn't register the cost of chasing it. It registers the relief of finally being chosen, even if the choice never lasts. The brain confuses anxiety with intuition. The brain confuses anxiety with intuition because both arrive as bodily signals, not thoughts. They feel urgent, internal, and authoritative. When the nervous system is activated, the mind assumes the message must be meaningful. The sensation feels like insight, even when it's actually fear looking for justification. Anxiety is rooted in threat detection. It scans for what could go wrong and pushes that information forward with intensity. Intuition, by contrast, is pattern recognition built from experience. The problem is that anxiety is louder. It comes with physical symptoms, tightness, urgency, restlessness, that demand attention. The brain mistakes this intensity for wisdom. This confusion is reinforced when avoidance follows. If anxiety leads to a decision that prevents discomfort, the brain marks it as a successful prediction. The relief afterward is misinterpreted as proof that the gut feeling was correct. Over time, the mind learns to trust anxious signals, even though they are driven by fear, not clarity. Anxiety also borrows the language of intuition. It speaks in absolutes and warnings. It feels protective, but unlike intuition, it lacks calm. True intuition is quiet, grounded, and steady. Anxiety rushes, pressures, and catastrophizes. The nervous system doesn't easily distinguish between the two unless it has learned regulation. This is why people abandon opportunities, mistrust safe connections, or stay stuck while believing they are listening to their gut. The brain isn't lying, it's mislabeling. When the nervous system is dysregulated, fear wears the mask of insight. Until the body feels safe, anxiety will keep impersonating intuition, and the mind will keep obeying it, believing it's being wise when it's really just trying to feel safe. Attention is more powerful than affection. Attention is more powerful than affection because the brain interprets attention as presence and presence as value. Affection can exist in words or gestures, but attention signals priority. When someone consistently pays attention, the nervous system registers safety, relevance, and importance. Attention activates the brain's reward circuitry. Being noticed, listened to, and mentally engaged with releases dopamine, reinforcing connection. Affection without attention feels hollow because it lacks engagement. The mind doesn't just want to be loved, it wants to be witnessed. This is why inconsistent attention can be more addictive than steady affection. The unpredictability keeps the brain alert, searching for cues of availability. Attention becomes the currency of connection, shaping attachment more strongly than expressions of care. Emotionally, attention validates existence. It says, "You matter enough to be focused on." Without attention, affection can feel performative or obligatory. With attention, even small gestures carry weight. Attention also regulates emotional states. Being fully present with someone calms their nervous system. Distraction, even subtle, signals withdrawal. The body notices before the mind does. This dynamic explains why people chase those who give them attention inconsistently and overlook those who offer steady affection. The brain is drawn to what engages it, not what reassures it. Attention shapes perception, attachment, and self-worth. It tells the brain where it stands in another person's priorities, and that information often matters more than love itself. People crave meaning more than happiness. People crave meaning more than happiness because happiness is fleeting, while meaning gives pain a purpose. The brain can tolerate discomfort, stress, and sacrifice if it understands why they exist. Pleasure alone doesn't anchor the mind, but meaning creates structure, direction, and emotional coherence. Happiness is reactive. It rises and falls with circumstances. Meaning, however, organizes experience. When actions feel connected to something larger than the self, the nervous system becomes more resilient. The brain interprets meaning as orientation. It answers the question of why effort, loss, and uncertainty are worth enduring. This is why people willingly choose difficult paths when they feel significant. Struggle without meaning feels unbearable, but struggle with meaning feels justified. The brain does not avoid pain, it avoids pointless pain. When suffering feels random, anxiety increases. When suffering feels purposeful, it becomes tolerable. Meaning also stabilizes identity. Happiness depends on external conditions, which are unpredictable. Meaning is internal. It allows the mind to remain grounded even when emotions fluctuate. This creates a deeper sense of fulfillment that outlasts momentary joy. People often feel emptiest not when they are sad, but when they are comfortable yet disconnected from purpose. The brain registers this as stagnation. Pleasure numbs, but meaning motivates. It gives weight to choices and direction to effort. This is why people leave comfortable lives, endure hardship, and chase causes rather than comfort. The brain is not designed to maximize happiness. It is designed to seek significance, coherence, and a reason to keep going. Silence can be more persuasive than words. Silence can be more persuasive than words because it creates psychological pressure without confrontation. When words stop, the mind of the other person begins to work. Humans are uncomfortable with unanswered space, so silence forces interpretation, reflection, and projection. The brain tries to resolve the gap by filling it with meaning. Silence shifts control. The person who remains quiet dictates the emotional rhythm of the interaction. Without verbal cues, the other person becomes more aware of their own thoughts, doubts, and assumptions. This inward turn makes them more likely to reveal information, justify themselves, or adjust their position. Words can be resisted, argued against, or ignored. Silence cannot. It doesn't push, it waits. That waiting creates tension, and tension demands release. People often speak more, explain more, or concede simply to escape the discomfort. The persuasion happens internally, without force. Silence also signals confidence. It suggests that nothing needs to be proven or defended. This perceived self-assurance can be disarming. The brain interprets calm quiet as strength, not absence. It implies certainty, patience, and control over the situation. In emotional exchanges, silence amplifies impact. A pause after a statement can make words land heavier than repetition ever could. Silence allows meaning to sink in and emotions to surface. The brain reacts not to what is said, but to what is left unsaid, and that space can be more influential than any argument. The brain rewards novelty with dopamine. The brain rewards novelty with dopamine because newness signals opportunity. From an evolutionary perspective, novelty meant potential resources, learning, or advantage. The nervous system learned to pay attention to what was new because what was new might improve survival. That chemical reward system still operates, even when novelty no longer serves long-term well-being. Dopamine is not the chemical of pleasure, it is the chemical of pursuit. When the brain encounters something unfamiliar, it releases dopamine to motivate exploration. This creates excitement, focus, and anticipation. The feeling isn't about satisfaction, it's about wanting more. Novelty activates the promise of reward before the reward ever arrives. This is why new experiences, ideas, people, and even problems feel stimulating at first. The brain lights up at possibility. Over time, as novelty fades, dopamine response drops, even if the thing itself remains valuable. The mind interprets this drop as boredom or loss of interest, not as normal neurochemistry. This mechanism drives behavior in powerful ways. It fuels curiosity, creativity, and growth, but it also feeds distraction, addiction, and restlessness. Endless scrolling, impulse decisions, and constant change exploit the system by delivering continuous novelty without fulfillment. The brain isn't asking whether something is good for you. It's responding to whether something is new. Dopamine rewards the chase, not the outcome. Without awareness, this can trap people in cycles of seeking stimulation while abandoning depth. Novelty feels like progress, but the chemical reward fades faster than meaning ever does. People protect ego before truth. People protect ego before truth because truth can threaten identity, and the brain is designed to defend identity at all costs. The ego acts as a psychological shield, preserving self-image, competence, and worth. When truth challenges that image, the nervous system reacts as if under attack. Admitting truth often requires admitting fault, limitation, or vulnerability. That admission can feel destabilizing, so the mind looks for ways to deflect, rationalize, or reinterpret reality. Logic becomes selective. Evidence is filtered. The goal shifts from understanding to self-protection. This is why people argue against facts they intellectually understand. The conflict isn't about information, it's about what that information implies about them. Truth that threatens status, morality, or intelligence triggers defensiveness before curiosity can emerge. Ego protection also preserves social standing. Being wrong can feel like losing power or respect. The brain calculates that preserving image is safer than embracing accuracy. In group settings, this response intensifies, as social judgment amplifies the perceived risk. Emotionally, ego defense reduces immediate discomfort. Long-term growth is sacrificed for short-term relief. The mind chooses feeling intact over being correct. Only when psychological safety is present does truth become accessible. When ego no longer feels endangered, the brain can relax its defenses. Until then, people will unconsciously bend reality to avoid the pain of self-examination, protecting who they believe they are over what is real. Rejection activates survival instincts. Rejection activates survival instincts because the brain interprets social exclusion as a threat to safety. Long before modern society, being rejected by the group meant loss of protection, resources, and survival. That ancient wiring still operates beneath conscious thought. When rejection occurs, the nervous system reacts as if danger is present, not as if a preference was expressed. This is why rejection triggers intense emotional and physical responses. Heart rate increases, stress hormones surge, and the body shifts into fight, flight, or freeze. The brain is not overreacting. It is responding to what it perceives as a survival threat. Even subtle forms of rejection, like being ignored or excluded, can activate this response. The pain of rejection lingers because the brain stores it as a warning. It becomes a reference point, shaping future behavior to prevent repeat exposure. People withdraw, people please, or avoid vulnerability, not because they are weak, but because the nervous system is trying to stay safe. Rejection also threatens identity. It raises the question of belonging and worth, both of which are deeply tied to survival. The mind searches for reasons, often blaming the self, because self-blame offers a sense of control. This mechanism explains why people fear rejection more than failure. Failure is an event. Rejection feels like erasure. The brain reacts accordingly, prioritizing acceptance, conformity, and approval. Even when doing so, suppresses authenticity. We trust confident liars more than hesitant truth-tellers. We trust confident liars more than hesitant truth-tellers because the brain equates certainty with credibility. Confidence feels like evidence. When someone speaks smoothly, maintains steady tone, and shows no visible doubt, the mind relaxes. Hesitation, pauses, or uncertainty trigger suspicion, even when the message is true. This bias exists because the brain looks for emotional signals before logical ones. Confidence reduces cognitive strain. It offers a sense of stability and direction. Doubt, even honest doubt, creates friction. The mind interprets that friction as risk. It would rather accept a clear, confident narrative than wrestle with ambiguity. Confident liars exploit this instinct. They deliver information with emotional authority, not accuracy. Their certainty bypasses critical thinking and activates trust. The listener feels guided rather than challenged. In contrast, truth-tellers who pause to think or qualify their statements can appear unreliable, even though their caution reflects honesty. This dynamic is reinforced socially. People are taught to value decisiveness. Certainty is rewarded. Admitting uncertainty is often mistaken for weakness. As a result, confidence becomes performative, while truth becomes vulnerable. The brain doesn't evaluate intent first, it evaluates presentation. When confidence and truth conflict, confidence often wins because it feels safer. The danger isn't that people lie well. It's that the mind is trained to trust how something is said more than whether it's true. People see what they expect to see. People see what they expect to see because the brain filters reality before it reaches awareness. Perception is not neutral. It is shaped by beliefs, past experiences, and emotional conditioning. The mind doesn't passively receive the world. It predicts it, then adjusts incoming information to match those predictions. This expectation-driven perception helps the brain move efficiently. Processing every detail would be overwhelming, so the mind fills in gaps based on what it assumes is likely. What aligns with expectation is noticed and remembered. What contradicts it is ignored, minimized, or explained away. Reality is edited to feel coherent. This is why first impressions are powerful and hard to undo. Once the brain labels someone as trustworthy, hostile, incompetent, or impressive, it selectively gathers evidence to support that label. Neutral actions are interpreted through the existing story. The expectation becomes a lens. Emotion strengthens this effect. Fear sharpens attention toward threat. Desire amplifies signals of possibility. Insecurity magnifies rejection. The brain highlights what confirms the emotional state it's already in. Seeing becomes an act of validation, not observation. This mechanism shapes relationships, beliefs, and conflict. People misunderstand each other not because reality is unclear, but because they are looking through different filters. Each feels certain they're seeing the truth. The danger is not expectation itself, but unconscious expectation. When the brain believes its predictions are reality, curiosity disappears. What you expect determines what you notice, and what you notice determines what you believe. The mind doesn't show you the world as it is. It shows you the world as it expects it to be. Emotional reactions reveal inner beliefs. Emotional reactions reveal inner beliefs because emotions are not random responses. They are reflections of meaning. What triggers a strong reaction points to what the mind believes is important, threatened, or true. The brain reacts based on interpretation, not reality itself. When something aligns with or challenges a deeply held belief, the nervous system responds instantly. Anger, defensiveness, shame, or anxiety signal that a core assumption has been touched. Two people can experience the same event and feel entirely different emotions because their beliefs filter the experience differently. This is why overreactions are rarely about the present moment. They are about the story the mind attaches to it. A comment may trigger anger not because of what was said, but because it reinforces a belief like, "I'm not respected," or "I'm not enough." The emotion exposes the belief operating beneath awareness. The brain uses emotion as a warning system. When a belief tied to identity or safety is activated, the reaction escalates to demand attention. The intensity of the emotion often matches the importance of the belief, not the severity of the situation. Many people try to control emotions without examining beliefs. This leads to suppression rather than understanding. Emotional reactions aren't flaws, they're data. They show where meaning is stored. When beliefs are examined and updated, emotional reactions change naturally. Until then, emotions will continue to surface, revealing the unseen rules guiding perception, behavior, and self-worth. The brain exaggerates threats under stress. The brain exaggerates threats under stress because survival systems take priority over accuracy. When stress levels rise, The nervous system shifts control away from rational processing and toward threat detection. The goal is not to be correct, but to be fast. Speed keeps you alive, even if it distorts reality. Under stress, the brain narrows its focus. It scans for danger and amplifies anything that could go wrong. Neutral cues become warnings. Uncertainty becomes catastrophe. This exaggeration is not imagination. It is a protective distortion designed to prevent harm. The mind would rather assume the worst than risk missing a threat. Stress hormones like cortisol intensify this effect. They heighten emotional memory and reduce access to perspective. The brain pulls from past fears and unresolved experiences, layering them onto the present moment. What feels urgent often isn't new. It's familiar fear resurfacing under pressure. This is why problems feel bigger when you're overwhelmed. The same situation that feels manageable in a calm state can feel unbearable under stress. The environment hasn't changed. The brain's filter has. It is operating in emergency mode. The danger of this response is that prolonged stress keeps the brain locked in threat amplification. Decisions become reactive, relationships strain, and avoidance increases. The brain isn't failing. It's doing exactly what it was designed to do in danger. But when stress becomes constant, that survival lens turns everyday life into a battlefield. People prefer belonging over authenticity. People prefer belonging over authenticity because social acceptance feels like safety, while authenticity feels like risk. Being fully yourself carries the possibility of rejection. Belonging promises protection from it. The brain is wired to prioritize staying connected over expressing truth, especially when the truth might threaten inclusion. From an early age, people learn which parts of themselves are rewarded and which are ignored or punished. The mind adapts by editing personality, opinions, and behavior to fit the environment. This isn't deception, it's survival. The nervous system learns that acceptance keeps discomfort away. Authenticity requires standing alone emotionally. It means tolerating misunderstanding, disagreement, or disapproval. Belonging offers immediate reassurance. The brain chooses the option that reduces social threat fastest. Over time, this preference becomes automatic. People adjust themselves without noticing, slowly distancing from their own instincts. This is why groups shape behavior so powerfully. People suppress doubts, soften boundaries, and abandon values to remain part of the circle. The fear isn't being wrong, it's being excluded. The brain registers exclusion as danger, so it complies before it questions. The cost is subtle but cumulative. When belonging replaces authenticity, identity becomes conditional. The self is maintained only in safe spaces. The brain trades truth for connection because connection feels essential. Even when it hurts, being included feels safer than being real and alone. Being right feels better than being kind to the ego. Being right feels better than being kind to the ego because being right reinforces identity, while kindness requires humility. The ego is built around self-concept, and correctness feels like proof of worth. When someone is right, the brain experiences validation. When someone is kind, the reward is quieter and less tied to status. Being right activates a sense of dominance and control. It tells the ego, I know, and knowing feels powerful. The nervous system interprets this as security. Kindness, on the other hand, often requires letting go of that power. It asks for patience, understanding, and sometimes restraint, which can feel like loss to the ego. This is why arguments escalate even when the relationship matters more than the point being made. Winning feels like self-preservation. Being right protects image, intelligence, and authority. Kindness may feel like surrender, especially when emotions are charged and the ego feels threatened. The brain also confuses correctness with moral superiority. Being right becomes a justification for tone, dismissal, or cruelty. The ego prioritizes proving a point over preserving connection because validation feels more urgent than empathy in the moment. Kindness operates on a longer timeline. It builds trust and safety, but it doesn't deliver instant gratification. Being right delivers an immediate hit of satisfaction. The ego chases that feeling, even at the cost of connection. Most conflicts are not about truth. They are about self-protection. When the ego feels unsafe, it will choose to be right over being kind, because correctness feels like armor, and kindness feels exposed. The mind normalizes repeated exposure. Because familiarity rewires perception faster than logic. When the brain encounters the same stimulus again and again, it gradually lowers its emotional response. What once felt shocking, wrong, or uncomfortable begins to feel ordinary, not because it changed, but because the nervous system adapted. This process is a survival function. Constant alertness is exhausting, so the brain conserves energy by reducing sensitivity to what is repeated. Over time, intensity fades and tolerance increases. The mind stops asking, "Is this acceptable?" and starts assuming, "This is normal." This is how unhealthy dynamics quietly become standards. Disrespect becomes routine. Stress becomes baseline. Chaos becomes home. The brain adjusts its expectations to match exposure, even when the situation is damaging. What you live with long enough starts to feel like what you deserve. Repeated exposure also dulls warning signals. Emotional discomfort that once triggered concern becomes background noise. The nervous system recalibrates, making it harder to recognize when something is wrong. Familiar pain becomes less noticeable than unfamiliar peace. This normalization affects beliefs as well as emotions. The mind reshapes values to align with experience, protecting itself from cognitive dissonance. If something can't be changed, the brain convinces itself it must be acceptable. Awareness disrupts this process, but only briefly. Without change, the mind adapts again. What surrounds you consistently doesn't just influence you, it trains you, and eventually, it defines what feels normal, even when it shouldn't. People romanticize potential more than reality. Because the brain is drawn to possibility, not evidence. Potential allows the mind to imagine an ideal future without confronting present limitations. Reality is fixed and measurable. Potential is flexible, hopeful, and emotionally stimulating. The brain prefers what could be over what is, because what could be hasn't failed yet. Potential activates dopamine. It fuels anticipation, optimism, and emotional investment. The mind fills gaps with imagined outcomes, projecting growth, change, or transformation. Reality, by contrast, demands acceptance. It requires seeing patterns as they are, not as they might become. Acceptance often carries grief, and the brain resists grief. This is why people stay attached to ideas, relationships, or paths that consistently disappoint them. Letting go of potential feels like giving up on a future version of life that hasn't had a chance to exist. The brain treats that imagined future as something real, something already emotionally owned. Romanticizing potential also protects identity. Admitting reality would mean admitting misjudgment or misplaced hope. The mind clings to possibility to avoid shame, regret, or loss. As long as potential exists, nothing has to end. Reality asks for boundaries. Potential asks for patience. The brain often chooses patience because it delays pain, but over time, the gap between what is and what could be creates chronic disappointment. Potential feels intoxicating because it is untouched by evidence. Reality feels heavy because it demands honesty. And for a brain wired to avoid emotional pain, the fantasy of what might be can feel far safer than the truth of what is. Self-criticism feels productive, but isn't. Self-criticism feels productive, but isn't because it creates the illusion of control. When people criticize themselves, it feels like accountability, effort, and awareness. The mind interprets harsh self-talk as motivation, but neurologically, it activates threat, not growth. The brain responds as if it's under attack. This internal pressure releases stress hormones, not clarity. Instead of improving focus, self-criticism narrows attention and reduces cognitive flexibility. The mind becomes preoccupied with avoiding mistakes rather than learning from them. What feels like discipline is often just fear in a socially acceptable form. Self-criticism also delays action. Beating yourself up feels like doing something, so it temporarily relieves guilt. That relief tricks the brain into believing progress has been made. In reality, energy is being spent on punishment rather than problem-solving. Nothing moves forward. Over time, this pattern damages self-trust. The brain begins to associate effort with pain and shame. Motivation becomes fragile. Confidence erodes quietly. People confuse suffering with seriousness, believing that growth must hurt to be real. True progress requires safety, not self-attack. The brain learns best when it feels supported enough to experiment, fail, and adjust. Self-criticism may sound like ambition, but it trains avoidance, not improvement. It keeps the mind busy, not better. The brain prioritizes social approval. The brain prioritizes social approval because belonging has always been tied to survival. Long before modern society, acceptance meant protection, resources, and continuity. Rejection meant isolation, and isolation meant danger. That ancient equation is still embedded in the nervous system, quietly shaping choices that feel personal but are deeply social. Social approval regulates the brain's sense of safety. When accepted, stress hormones drop and the nervous system relaxes. When disapproved of, the brain activates threat responses similar to physical danger. This is why embarrassment, rejection, and criticism can feel physically painful. The brain doesn't distinguish between social threat and survival threat. It treats both as urgent. Approval also reinforces identity. Positive feedback tells the brain who it is allowed to be. Over time, behavior adapts to maintain that approval. People learn which traits are rewarded and which are punished, then shape themselves accordingly. Authentic impulses are filtered through the question of acceptability before they ever reach expression. This mechanism explains conformity, people-pleasing, and fear of standing out. Even when logic says approval shouldn't matter, the nervous system disagrees. The body reacts faster than reason. Approval feels like relief. Disapproval feels like danger. The brain is not trying to limit you, it is trying to keep you connected. But when social approval becomes the primary compass, self-trust weakens. Choices become reactions. Identity becomes performance. The mind will sacrifice honesty, growth, and even happiness to maintain belonging, because to the brain, being accepted feels safer than being free. People avoid discomfort even if growth requires it. People avoid discomfort even if growth requires it because the brain equates discomfort with danger. Physical and emotional discomfort activate the same threat systems, signaling the nervous system to retreat. Growth, however, almost always begins with uncertainty, effort, and vulnerability, which the brain interprets as risk rather than reward. The mind's primary goal is not expansion, but protection. Staying comfortable preserves energy and predictability. Discomfort demands adaptation, and adaptation feels destabilizing. Even when logic understands that growth is beneficial, the nervous system resists because safety feels more urgent than improvement. This is why people delay difficult conversations, avoid challenges, and abandon goals at the first sign of friction. Discomfort exposes the possibility of failure, rejection, or inadequacy. The brain calculates that avoiding these sensations prevents emotional pain, even if it also prevents progress. Discomfort also threatens identity. Trying something new risks discovering limitations. Staying the same preserves the familiar self, even if that self feels unsatisfied. The mind would rather tolerate stagnation than confront uncertainty about who it might become. Over time, avoidance becomes habitual. The nervous system learns that escape brings relief, reinforcing the pattern. Growth remains abstract, while comfort remains immediate. Real change requires retraining the brain to tolerate discomfort without interpreting it as danger. Until that happens, the mind will continue choosing short-term ease over long-term fulfillment, protecting comfort at the expense of potential. Emotional safety determines openness. Emotional safety determines openness because the brain only reveals what it believes will not be punished. Before sharing thoughts, feelings, or vulnerability, the nervous system scans the environment for cues of acceptance or threat. If safety is felt, openness flows naturally. If safety is missing, even simple honesty feels dangerous. The brain prioritizes protection over expression. When past experiences taught that vulnerability led to shame, dismissal, or conflict, the nervous system learns to withhold. Silence becomes a defense. Openness requires trust, and trust is built not through words, but through consistent emotional responses. Emotional safety is communicated subtly, being listened to without interruption, having feelings validated, and not being rushed to fix or explain all signal safety. Judgment, impatience, or minimization signal threat. The body registers these signals instantly, often before conscious thought. When emotional safety is present, the brain relaxes its guard. Curiosity replaces defensiveness. Creativity and honesty increase because the nervous system no longer needs to self-censor. People don't open up because they are brave. They open up because it feels safe enough to do so. This is why forcing communication backfires. Pressure activates protection. True openness cannot be demanded. It is invited. The brain opens when it believes it will be met with understanding rather than consequences. Emotional safety doesn't guarantee agreement. It guarantees permission to exist without fear. And when that permission is present, openness becomes a natural response, not a risk. The brain equates familiarity with truth. The brain equates familiarity with truth because repetition reduces uncertainty. When something is heard, seen, or experienced often enough, it begins to feel reliable. The nervous system interprets familiarity as safety, and safety is mistaken for accuracy. What feels known feels true, even when it isn't. This happens because the brain conserves energy by relying on patterns. Familiar ideas require less effort to process. They slide smoothly into existing mental frameworks, while new or conflicting information creates friction. The mind prefers what is easy to accept over what must be examined. Repetition strengthens belief. The more often a message appears, the less resistance it encounters. Eventually, the brain stops questioning it altogether. This is why myths persist, stereotypes spread, and false narratives feel convincing. Familiarity dulls skepticism. Emotion reinforces this effect. If a familiar belief is tied to identity, comfort, or belonging, it gains even more weight. Challenging it feels disruptive, even offensive. The mind defends what it recognizes because recognition feels like stability. The danger is subtle. People don't believe things because they're true. They believe them because they've heard them before. Familiarity becomes a substitute for evidence. The brain isn't trying to deceive. It's trying to feel oriented. In that effort, repetition quietly replaces reality. People fear loss more than they value gain. People fear loss more than they value gain because the brain is wired to protect what it already has. From a survival perspective, Losing resources meant immediate danger, while gaining more was optional. That imbalance shaped a nervous system that reacts more intensely to potential loss than to potential reward. Loss triggers threat responses. The brain treats it as a subtraction from safety, identity, or control. Even small losses activate anxiety, regret, and vigilance. Gains, by contrast, are processed more quietly. They feel good, but they don't demand protection in the same way. The emotional weight is uneven. This is why people stay in unsatisfying situations rather than risk change. What is familiar feels owned, even if it hurts. Letting go feels like danger, while improvement feels hypothetical. The brain trusts what exists over what might exist. Loss also feels personal. It suggests failure, vulnerability, or misjudgment. The mind replays what could have been done differently, reinforcing the pain. Gains don't provoke the same rumination. They are enjoyed briefly, then normalized. This imbalance shapes decisions everywhere. People avoid risks, delay opportunities, and cling to relationships or beliefs long past their value. The fear isn't of missing out on something better, it's of losing something known. The brain isn't pessimistic, it's protective. But when fear of loss dominates, it keeps people stuck defending comfort instead of pursuing growth. What feels like caution is often just loss aversion, disguised as wisdom. Overconfidence often masks insecurity. Overconfidence often masks insecurity because exaggerated certainty acts as armor. When someone feels unsure, exposed, or inadequate, the mind compensates by projecting strength. Confidence becomes performative, not because the person feels powerful, but because they fear being seen as weak. The brain is highly sensitive to threats against self-worth. When insecurity is triggered, the nervous system moves into defense mode. Overconfidence becomes a way to regain control, dominate the narrative, and prevent scrutiny. Loud certainty discourages questions. Assertiveness becomes a shield. This pattern often develops in environments where vulnerability was punished. The mind learns that doubt invites criticism, so it hides uncertainty behind bravado. The stronger the performance, the deeper the fear it's protecting. True confidence is calm. Defensive confidence is rigid. Overconfidence also seeks validation. It needs acknowledgement to sustain itself because it isn't internally grounded. When challenged, it reacts aggressively or dismissively, revealing the fragility underneath. Secure confidence can tolerate being wrong. Insecurity cannot. Emotionally, this behavior distances others. It may impress at first, but it erodes trust over time. People sense when certainty is forced rather than embodied. Understanding this dynamic shifts perception. What looks like arrogance is often fear of exposure. Overconfidence isn't an excess of belief in oneself. It's a defense against the absence of it, built to protect a self-image that feels constantly under threat. The brain conserves energy by choosing habits. because efficiency is a survival priority. Every decision requires mental effort, and effort consumes energy. To preserve resources, the brain automates repeated behaviors, turning conscious choices into unconscious routines. Once a habit is formed, the brain can act without evaluating options, saving time and cognitive load. Habits reduce uncertainty. When a behavior is familiar, the brain doesn't need to assess risk or predict outcomes. It already knows what will happen. This predictability calms the nervous system, even if the habit is harmful. Comfort is not measured by benefit, but by familiarity. This is why change feels exhausting. Breaking a habit forces the brain back into decision-making mode, increasing effort and stress. The nervous system resists because it interprets this effort as inefficiency. Staying the same feels easier, not because it's better, but because it costs less energy. Habits also shape identity. Repeated actions become proof of who you are, reinforcing self-concept. The brain protects habits because losing them feels like losing stability. Even when a habit no longer serves you, it still provides structure. This mechanism explains why awareness alone doesn't create change. Knowing a habit is harmful doesn't deactivate the brain's energy-saving systems. Change requires sustained effort until a new behavior becomes familiar enough to automate. The brain isn't lazy, it's economical. It chooses habits not to limit you, but to survive efficiently, even when that efficiency keeps you stuck. People mistake attraction for compatibility. People mistake attraction for compatibility because attraction is loud and compatibility is quiet. Attraction activates the brain's reward system, flooding it with chemicals tied to desire, excitement, and anticipation. That intensity feels meaningful, so the mind assumes it must signal something deep and lasting. Attraction narrows perception. When it's present, the brain focuses on emotional highs and ignores long-term patterns. Red flags are softened. Differences feel intriguing rather than problematic. The mind fills gaps with hope, assuming chemistry will compensate for misalignment. Compatibility, which is built on values, communication, and emotional safety, doesn't create the same immediate rush. The brain is biased toward intensity. Excitement feels like proof. Calm understanding feels boring by comparison. This leads people to associate discomfort with passion and stability with lack of connection. The nervous system confuses emotional stimulation with emotional fit. Attraction is also often rooted in familiarity, especially unresolved emotional patterns. The body recognizes something known, not necessarily healthy. That recognition sparks desire, even when the dynamic recreates old wounds. Compatibility doesn't activate old patterns, so it can feel unfamiliar or underwhelming. Over time, attraction fades, but incompatibility remains. When the chemical intensity settles, what's left becomes visible. The mistake wasn't feeling attracted, it was assuming attraction was evidence of alignment. The brain followed excitement. It didn't stop to ask whether peace could live there too. Emotional wounds resurface in new relationships. Emotional wounds resurface in new relationships because the brain doesn't heal by forgetting. It heals by re-experiencing safely. Unresolved emotional pain remains stored in the nervous system, not as memory, but as expectation. When a new connection forms, the brain scans for familiar patterns, not to sabotage, but to protect. The mind uses past relationships as reference points. If betrayal, abandonment, or rejection once caused pain, the nervous system stays alert for similar signals. Neutral behavior can be misread as threat. Silence feels like rejection. Distance feels like danger. The body reacts before logic has time to intervene. This is why old wounds show up as overreactions, mistrust, or emotional withdrawal. The reaction isn't about the present person. It's about the past experience being activated. The brain believes it is preventing repetition by sounding the alarm early. Relationships intensify this process because attachment lowers defenses. The closer the bond, the more the nervous system risks exposure. That vulnerability reopens stored fear. What hasn't been processed seeks resolution, and the relationship becomes the stage where unfinished emotions surface. This is not weakness, it is pattern completion. The brain is trying to correct what once hurt by encountering it again under new conditions. But without awareness, people confuse old pain for new reality. Healing doesn't happen by avoiding connection. It happens by recognizing when the past is speaking through the present and learning to respond from now instead of then. People seek certainty in chaos. People seek certainty in chaos because uncertainty overwhelms the nervous system. When the world feels unstable, the brain searches urgently for something solid to hold on to. Certainty acts like a psychological anchor, calming fear by reducing the number of unknowns the mind has to process. Even flawed certainty feels safer than unanswered questions. Chaos triggers survival mode. In this state, the brain prioritizes clarity over accuracy. It wants quick explanations, clear sides, and predictable outcomes. Ambiguity requires patience and emotional tolerance, both of which diminish under stress. Certainty offers immediate relief by creating the illusion of control. This is why people cling to rigid beliefs, routines, or leaders during turbulent times. Clear narratives reduce anxiety. Even if they oversimplify reality, the mind would rather commit to a single explanation than remain suspended in doubt. Emotionally, certainty provides identity and belonging. Shared beliefs create group cohesion, making individuals feel less alone in uncertainty. Challenging those beliefs would reintroduce instability, so the brain defends them fiercely. The pursuit of certainty can override curiosity. Once the nervous system feels soothed, the motivation to question fades. Safety becomes more important than truth. In chaos, people aren't searching for what is most accurate. They are searching for what helps them breathe again. Certainty, even when fragile, offers that relief. The mind resists letting go of identity. The mind resists letting go of identity because identity provides psychological ground to stand on. The brain needs a stable sense of self to navigate the world. Even when an identity is limiting, outdated, or painful, it offers predictability. Letting it go would mean stepping into uncertainty, and uncertainty is interpreted as threat. Identity organizes experience. It tells the brain how to interpret events, what to expect from others, and how to respond. When identity is challenged, the nervous system reacts defensively because losing identity feels like losing orientation. The mind would rather cling to a flawed self-concept than face the disorientation of not knowing who it is. This is why people hold onto labels formed through trauma, failure, or early conditioning. Identities like the responsible one, the broken one, or the strong one may be painful, but they are familiar. Familiarity feels safer than reinvention. The brain protects these identities because they reduce uncertainty, not because they are true. Letting go of identity also threatens belonging. Identities are often reinforced by social roles and expectations. Changing who you are can disrupt relationships, and the brain is deeply sensitive to that risk. Survival has always depended on acceptance. The mind doesn't resist change because it is stubborn. It resists because identity equals safety. Growth requires temporarily tolerating the discomfort of not knowing who you are yet. Until the nervous system learns that safety can exist without a fixed identity, it will cling to what it knows, even if what it knows no longer fits. Being understood reduces defensiveness. Being understood reduces defensiveness because understanding signals safety to the nervous system. When someone feels truly seen and heard, the brain no longer prepares for attack. Defensiveness exists to protect against threat, and understanding removes the perception of threat before it needs to escalate. The moment a person feels misunderstood, their mind shifts into self-protection. They stop listening and start preparing a defense. Words become weapons or shields. But when understanding is felt, not just expressed, that internal alarm quiets. The body relaxes. The need to justify or explain diminishes. This happens because validation and agreement are not the same. Understanding doesn't mean approval. It means accurate recognition. When someone feels accurately perceived, their identity feels intact. They don't need to fight to be seen. The brain registers that its internal experience has been acknowledged, which restores emotional balance. Understanding also reduces shame. Defensiveness often hides fear of being judged or rejected. When another person reflects your experience without distortion, shame loses its grip. Openness becomes possible because the risk of exposure feels lower. This is why arguments soften when someone finally says, "I get why you feel that way." The nervous system hears safety in that sentence. Once understood, people can consider feedback, responsibility, or change. Without understanding, the mind stays armored, protecting itself from a world it believes is hostile. Being understood reduces defensiveness. Being understood reduces defensiveness because understanding tells the nervous system it is no longer under threat. Defensiveness is not aggression, it is protection. The moment someone feels misunderstood, judged, or misrepresented, the brain shifts into survival mode. Listening stops, guarding begins. The brain is constantly scanning for signals of safety or danger in social interactions. When someone feels unheard, the mind interprets it as erasure or rejection. That triggers a need to defend identity, intentions, and worth. Words become sharper, explanations longer, emotions louder. The goal is no longer connection, but self-preservation. Understanding interrupts this cycle. When a person feels accurately seen, their internal alarm quiets. They no longer need to prove themselves because their experience has already been acknowledged. This doesn't require agreement. It requires recognition. The brain relaxes when it senses that its internal reality has landed correctly in another person. Defensiveness is fueled by the fear of being misjudged. Understanding removes that fear by creating emotional safety. Once safety is present, curiosity returns. Openness becomes possible. The mind can tolerate feedback because it no longer feels like an attack. This is why conflicts de-escalate the moment someone feels understood. The body releases tension. The need to fight dissolves. Understanding doesn't end disagreement, but it ends the war. When people feel seen, they stop bracing for impact and start engaging from a place of stability rather than defense. People conform even when uncomfortable. People conform even when uncomfortable because the brain prioritizes belonging over authenticity. Social acceptance has always been tied to survival, and the nervous system still treats exclusion as a threat. When faced with the choice between fitting in and expressing discomfort, the brain often chooses conformity to maintain safety. Discomfort is easier to tolerate than isolation. The mind calculates risk quickly, and standing out feels more dangerous than staying silent. Even when something feels wrong internally, aligning with the group reduces anxiety. The nervous system relaxes when it senses inclusion, even at the cost of self-betrayal. This is why people agree publicly while disagreeing privately. The brain suppresses dissent to avoid conflict, judgment, or rejection. Over time, repeated conformity dulls internal signals, making discomfort easier to ignore. The cost is gradual disconnection from one's own values. Conformity is reinforced by social cues. Approval, laughter, and validation reward alignment, while silence or disapproval punish deviation. The brain learns quickly which behaviors are safe to express. Authenticity becomes conditional. This mechanism doesn't disappear with confidence or intelligence. Even self-aware people conform when the social stakes feel high. The brain isn't trying to deceive, it's trying to protect. People don't conform because they lack courage. They conform because the nervous system equates belonging with safety. Until safety is felt internally, authenticity will always feel like a risk rather than a right. The brain remembers negative events more vividly. The brain remembers negative events more vividly because it is wired to prioritize threat over comfort. Negative experiences carry survival information. From an evolutionary perspective, remembering what hurt you was more important than remembering what pleased you. Pain taught avoidance. Pleasure was optional. That imbalance still shapes memory today. When something negative happens, the brain releases stress hormones that strengthen memory encoding. Emotion acts like a highlighter, and fear, shame, and loss create some of the strongest marks. Positive experiences often pass without the same chemical intensity, so they fade faster, even if they were meaningful. This is why one criticism can outweigh 10 compliments. The nervous system flags the negative as something that must not be repeated. The brain replays it to extract lessons, but repetition reinforces emotional impact, making the memory feel larger and more recent than it is. Negative memories also shape perception. Once stored, they influence how the brain interprets future events. Neutral situations are scanned for similar threats, keeping the nervous system alert. This can create a persistent sense of unease long after the original event has passed. The brain isn't being cruel, it's being protective, but this protection comes at a cost. When negative memories dominate awareness, they distort reality, making the world feel more dangerous than it is. Understanding this bias matters because healing often requires consciously reinforcing positive experiences. The brain won't do it automatically. It remembers what hurt because it believes your survival depends on it.